they do this, the Republicans and Democrats will lose votes and lose their seat. And I'd like to hang up and listen to what you guys have to say about that.
Ken from Claymont.
Postponed. Votes will be taken in the following order. H.R. 876 by the yeas and nays. H.R. 253 by the yeas and nays. H.R. 862 by the yeas and nays. The first electronic vote will be conducted as a 15-minute vote. Remaining electronic votes will be conducted as 5-minute votes. The unfinished business is the vote on the motion of the gentleman from Utah, Mr. Bishop, to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 876, on which the yeas and nays are ordered. The clerk will report the title of the bill.
Union Calendar Number 52, H.R. 876, a bill to authorize the continued use of certain water diversions located on National Forest System land and the Frank Church River of No Return Wilderness and the Selway Bitterroot Wilderness in the state of Idaho and for other purposes.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill? Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 15-minute vote.
First vote in the U.S. House this evening, and 2 more will follow. The House plans to work on several bills this week, including one that would ban abortions after 20 weeks. It's sponsored by Arizona Congressman Trent Franks. And to hear more about that legislation, we spoke earlier today with a Capitol Hill reporter. We just had some technical difficulties. They were experiencing the first vote in the U.S. House for this evening, and 2 more will follow. The House plans to work on several bills this week, one that will ban abortions after 20 weeks. It's sponsored by Arizona Congressman Trent Franks, and to hear more about that legislation, we spoke earlier today with a Capitol Hill reporter.
Is the health policy correspondent for NPR. Why are House Republicans taking up a bill to ban abortions after 20 weeks of pregnancy?
Well, the committee reported it last week. We're frankly not quite sure why they're taking it up on such a quick action. When this bill was introduced just a couple of weeks ago, they weren't sure it was going to come up on the floor at all. It was definitely going to be marked up in the subcommittee, and then it got marked up in the full committee. But why they're bringing it to the floor with such alacrity is still a question that nobody is quite sure the answer to.
Now, there's been a change to the bill since it was marked up and approved in the Judiciary Committee last week. What is that change, and why was this language added?
That's right. Leaders announced last Friday, which was the day after the bill was marked up, that they would be adding an exception in the bill for rape and incest. Originally, as the bill came out of committee, this was going to be a ban on virtually all abortions after 20 weeks of pregnancy, with the exception of pregnancies that threatened the life of the woman. Now they're adding language for abortions in the case of rape and incest, and that was because there was a little bit of a dust-up at the markup. Trent Franks of Arizona, the sponsor actually of the bill, said that he said that abortions in the case of rape were rare. Now he explained as the markup went on that what he meant was that abortions after 20 weeks resulting from rapes were rare. But Democrats took that language and really ran with it and made quite the fuss about it. And so they decided that they would add that language to the bill, even though an amendment failed actually at the markup. They've also decided not to let Congressman Franks manage the bill on the floor. Instead, it's going to be managed by Marsha Blackburn of Tennessee, which is interesting because she's not even a member of the Judiciary Committee, which is the bill that which is the committee that the bill emerged from.
Why do you suppose that's happening?
Well, I think that the Republicans are very sensitive. Obviously, you know, last year, Todd Akin, who was running for Senate from Missouri, also made comments about the unlikelihood of getting pregnant after a rape. He ended up losing his race, even though he was a prohibitive favorite at the time. So Republicans are very sensitive to this sort of thing, and I think when Congressman Franks made that comment, even though it's been taken a little bit out of context, I think they were very sensitive to that. And I wondered, you know, why Marsha Blackburn would be managing this bill when she's not even on the committee. Went back and looked down and realized there is not a female Republican on the Judiciary Committee, so they didn't have a woman to manage the bill. They had to actually turn to someone else in order to get a woman Republican to manage the bill.
So this is a Republican-sponsored bill. What's been the reaction from Democrats to the measure?
Oh, well, Democrats hate it. They point out, among other things, that it is facially unconstitutional, which Republicans do acknowledge. I mean, the Supreme Court has been pretty clear on this, that abortions cannot be banned before fetal viability, which pretty much everybody on both sides agrees is around 23 weeks and later of pregnancy. And since this reaches back to 20 weeks, an appeals court just a few weeks ago struck down a similar Arizona law. But what they are hoping by pushing this bill forward, in addition to making political statement about how much, you know, Americans don't like abortions later in pregnancy, but what they're saying is that they're hoping that if it should pass and get to the Supreme Court, obviously unlikely given the makeup of the Senate and the fact that the president is unlikely to sign it, but should it somehow get to the Supreme Court, they're hoping that perhaps the Supreme Court would use this law to change its mind about this. But as it stands now, this does violate current Supreme Court precedent on abortion.
Let's go back to the House Judiciary Committee markup last week. What was that debate like?
It was pretty testy. You know, the House Judiciary Committee has been through this a lot. There was a similar bill last year that only applied to the District of Columbia. Now, a number of states have passed these kinds of laws, and the justification, they say, is that scientists have suggested that 20 weeks of pregnancy is when a fetus can begin to feel pain. That is a scientifically disputed theory, but that is the justification under which these laws are being passed. The Judiciary Committee had a bill that would apply this only to the District of Columbia because they can, because Congress oversees laws in the District of Columbia. The House actually put it on the floor, but they put it under suspension of the rules, which requires a two-thirds majority, and it didn't pass. It didn't get the supermajority it needed. This bill is not going to be that way. This bill is coming with the rule. It only needs a simple majority, so it's considered much more likely that this bill will pass. But Democrats were, you know, at the markup, you know, we went through sort of similar that we've seen sort of over the years at the Judiciary Committee, Republicans talking about, you know, how horrible abortion is and how much the American public doesn't like it. Democrats talking about, you know, thinking about the woman and how the Constitution and the Supreme Court currently guarantees women a right to choose, and talking about some of the difficult situations, particularly later in pregnancy when women, particularly in difficult medical situations, should have this right.
Well, the bill is coming up Tuesday, and as you've said, you think it will pass. Who are you watching most closely?
Well, you know, this generally tends to be a fairly Republican-Democratic split, although there are a lot of Democrats, particularly from the South, but not exclusively, you know, Democrats who vote anti-abortion. This obviously was a big issue when the Affordable Care Act came up. There were many, many Democrats who were worried about, you know, abortion votes and wanting to, you know, maintain an anti-abortion voting record. Many of them actually got voted out in 2010, so there aren't quite as many as there used to be. But it's not, it is largely a party line issue, but not exclusively a party line issue. There are considerably fewer Republicans who vote with abortion rights backers these days. That has become a much rarer sight. So I would look to see if there are any of those. But again, I'll be interested in this particular bill because it does, on its face, as I mentioned, violate current Supreme Court precedent. So it will be interesting to see how many Republicans are willing to go out, as I mentioned, sort of on a limb, if you will. This is stretching kind of the bounds of how far you can go on an abortion bill and still be considered, you know, within the realms of, I think, what the public really supports.
So what's likely to happen in the Senate if this bill does pass the House?
Well, it's hard to say. I don't think the Senate would take up the bill as it is, but I could see someone trying to attach this to some other bill and try to force a vote, perhaps try to force some of the Democrats, from some of these some of these Democrats who are in maybe tough races, to have to take a vote on this, to make this a difficult vote. I could definitely see that happening.
And very quickly, how about the Obama administration? What is their take?
I don't believe they've said yet as of now, but it would be hard to imagine the president supporting this bill or doing anything except promising to veto it.
Julie Rovner is the health policy correspondent for NPR. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Right now, the House is in a series of 3 votes on the floor. They'll begin special order speeches after this and plan to return tomorrow at 10 a.m. Eastern for morning hour speeches and noon for legislative work. This week, the chamber also plans to begin work on the Farm Bill, a 5-year reauthorization of farm policies and nutrition programs. Meanwhile, in the Senate, the chamber earlier today confirmed 2 judicial nominations before returning to work on immigration policy. Majority Leader Harry Reid has said he'd like to hold a final passage vote on that measure before the July 4th recess. President Obama started off his G8 summit trip in Belfast, Northern Ireland earlier today, where he spoke to a crowd of 2,000 guests, mostly students. He talked about lasting peace in that country and urged students to challenge attitudes and prejudices. Here's a portion of that now.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Hey. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Please be seated, please. Well, hello, Belfast. Hello, Northern Ireland. You now know why it's so difficult to speak after Michelle. She's better than me. But on behalf of both of us, thank you so much for this extraordinarily warm welcome. And I want to thank Hannah for introducing my wife. We had a chance to speak with Hannah backstage, and she's an extraordinary young woman who I know is going to do even greater things in years to come. I want to thank 2 men who I've hosted at the White House on many a St. Patrick's Day for their warm welcome. First Minister Peter Robinson and Deputy First Minister Martin McGuinness. I spend the whole year trying to unite Washington around things, and they come to visit on St. Patrick's Day, and they do it in a single afternoon. I want to thank the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, Theresa Villiers. To all the ministers in the audience, to Lord Mayor Marcin O'Molier, and I want to thank all the citizens of Belfast and Northern Ireland for your hospitality. As our daughters pointed out as we were driving in, I cause a big fuss wherever I go. So traffic and barricades and police officers, and it's all a big production. A lot of people are involved, and I'm very, very grateful for accommodating us. You know, the first time Michelle and I visited this island was about 2 years ago. We were honored to join tens of thousands on College Green in Dublin. We traveled to the little village of Moneygall, where, as it turned out, my great-great-great-grandfather was born. And I actually identified this individual in this place only a few years ago. When I was first running for office in Chicago, I didn't know this, but I wish I had. When I was in Chicago, as I was campaigning, they'd look at my last name, and they'd say, "Oh, there's an Obama from the homeland running on the south side, so he must be Irish, but I've never heard the Gaelic name Barack." But it pays to be Irish in Chicago. So while we were in Moneygall, I had a chance to meet my 8th cousin, Henry, who's also known as Henry VIII. We knew he was my cousin because his ears flapped out, just like mine. I leafed through the parish logs where the names of my ancestors are recorded. I even watched Michelle learn how to pull a proper pint of black. Who's cheering for that? So it was a magical visit, but the only problem was it was far too short. A volcano in Iceland forced us to leave before we could even spend the night. So we've been eager for a chance to return to the Emerald Isle ever since. And this time we brought our daughters too. In particular, we wanted to come here, to Northern Ireland, a place of remarkable beauty and extraordinary history, part of an island with which tens of millions of Americans share an eternal relationship. America's story, in part, began right outside the doors of this gleaming hall. 325 years ago, a ship set sail from the River Lagan for the Chesapeake Bay, filled with men and women who dreamed of building a new life in a new land. They, followed by hundreds of thousands more, helped America write those early chapters. They helped us win our independence. They helped us draft our Constitution. And soon after, America returned to Belfast, opening one of our very first consulates here in 1796, when George Washington was still president. So today, names familiar to many of you are etched on schools and courthouses and solemn memorials of war across the United States. Names like Wilson and Kelly, Campbell and O'Neill. So many of the qualities that we Americans hold dear, we imported from this land. Perseverance, faith, an unbending belief that we make our own destiny, and an unshakable dream that if we work hard and we live responsibly, something better lies just around the bend. So our histories are bound by blood and belief, by culture and by commerce. And our futures are equally, inextricably linked. And that's why I've come to Belfast today, to talk about the future we can build together. Your generation, the young generation, has come of age in a world with fewer walls, You've been educated in an era of instant information. You've been tempered by some very difficult times around the globe. And as I travel, what I've seen of young people like you around the world show me these currents have conspired to make you a generation possessed by both a clear-eyed realism, but also an optimistic idealism. A generation keenly aware of the world as it is, but eager to forge the world as it should be. And when it comes to the future we share, that fills me with hope. Young people fill me with hope. Here in Northern Ireland, this generation has known even more rapid change than many young people have seen around the world. And while you have unique challenges of your own, you also have unique reasons to be hopeful. For you are the first generation in this land to inherit more than just the hardened attitudes and the bitter prejudices of the past. You're an inheritor of a just and hard-earned peace. You now live in a thoroughly modern Northern Ireland. Of course, the recessions that spread through nearly every country in recent years have inflicted hardship here too, and there are communities that still endure real pain. But day to day, life is changing throughout the North. There was a time people couldn't have imagined Northern Ireland hosting a gathering of world leaders, as you are today. And I want to thank Chief Constable Matt Baggett for working to keep everyone safe this week. Northern Ireland is hosting the World Police and Fire Games later this year. Which Dom Mary Peters is helping to organize. Golf fans like me had to wait a long 6 decades for the Irish Open to return to the North last year. I am unhappy that I will not get a few rounds in while I'm here. I did meet Rory McIlroy last year, Rory offered to get my swing sorted, which was a polite way of saying, Mr. President, you need help. None of that would have been imaginable a generation ago. And Belfast is a different city. Once abandoned factories are rebuilt, former industrial sites are reborn, visitors come from all over to see an exhibit at the MAC, a play at the Lyric, a concert here at Waterfront Hall. Families crowd into pubs in the Cathedral Quarter to hear trot. Students lounge at cafes, asking each other, what's the crack? Right? Hey. So to paraphrase Seamus Heaney, it's the manifestation of sheer bloody genius. This island is now chic. And these daily moments of life in a bustling city, a changing country, it may seem ordinary to many of you, and that's what makes it so extraordinary. For that's what your parents and grandparents dreamt for all of you. To travel without the burden of checkpoints or roadblocks or seeing soldiers on patrol. To enjoy a sunny day free from the ever-present awareness that violence could blacken it at any moment. To befriend or fall in love with whomever you want. They hoped for a day when the world would think something different when they heard the word Belfast. And because of their effort, because of their courage, that day has come. Because of their work, those dreams they had for you became the most incredible thing of all. It became a reality. It's been 15 years now since the Good Friday Agreement, since clenched fists gave way to outstretched hands. And the people of this island voted in overwhelming numbers to see beyond the scars of violence and mistrust and to choose to wage peace. Over the years, other breakthroughs and agreements have followed. That's extraordinary, because for years, few conflicts in the world seemed more intractable than the one here in Northern Ireland. So that when peace was achieved here, it gave the entire world hope. The world rejoiced in your achievement, especially in America. Pubs from Chicago to Boston were scenes of revelry. Folks celebrating the hard work of Hume and Trimble and Adams and Paisley and so many others. In America, you helped us transcend our differences, because if there's one thing on which Democrats and Republicans in America wholeheartedly agree, it's that we strongly support a peaceful and prosperous Northern Ireland. But, as all of you know, all too well, for all the strides that you've made, there's still much work to do. There's still people who haven't reaped the rewards of peace. There are those who aren't convinced that the effort is worth it.
On this vote, the yeas are 398, the nays are 0. Two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. The unfinished business is on the vote on the motion of the gentleman from Utah, Mr. Bishop, to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 253, as amended, on which the yeas and nays are ordered. The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 253, a bill to provide for the conveyance of a small parcel of National Forest System land in the Uinta-Wasatch Cache National Forest in Utah to Brigham Young University and for other purposes.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill as amended? Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 5-minute vote.
Votes continue here on the House floor. One more to follow this one. Tonight at 9 p.m. Eastern, author John Roberts, on his book Rating the First Ladies, The Women Who Influenced the Presidency, it examines First Ladies as political partners with their husbands rather than wives and mothers. And with this being the first season of the First Ladies series being completed, right now on Facebook we're asking the question, of the First Ladies so far, who is your favorite? You can join the conversation by logging on to Facebook.com/C-SPAN to cast your vote. Right now, Mary Todd Lincoln is leading those polls. Some programming information to tell you about. Tomorrow, the Senate Commerce Committee holds a confirmation hearing for Thomas Wheeler, the nominee for the next Federal Communications Commission chairman. He's the former head of the National Cable and Telecommunications Association, and you can see his testimony Tuesday, 2:30 p.m. Eastern on C-SPAN 3. And later, the final debate for the open Massachusetts Senate seat. Democratic Congressman Ed Markey faces Republican challenger Gabe Gomez in Boston. A special election will be held June 25th for the seat left vacant by John Kerry, who resigned to become Secretary of State. That debate is courtesy of WGBH-TV, and it starts live, 7 p.m. Eastern, also on C-SPAN 3.
The nays are 1, 2/3 being in the affirmative. The rules are suspended. The bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Objection, the title is amended. The unfinished business is the vote on the motion of the gentleman from Utah, Mr. Bishop, to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 862, on which the yeas and nays are ordered. The clerk will report the title of the bill.
Union Calendar number 51, H.R. 862, a bill to authorize the conveyance of 2 small parcels of land within the boundaries of the Coconino National Forest, containing private improvements that were developed based upon the reliance of the landowners in an erroneous survey conducted in May 1960.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill? Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 5-minute vote.
This is the last vote tonight on the House floor. After this, the chamber turns to special order speeches. Members return tomorrow at 10 a.m. Eastern for morning hour speeches and noon for legislative work. On the agenda tomorrow, a measure sponsored by an Arizona Republican that would ban abortions after 20 weeks. Also this week, debate and votes on the Farm Bill, a 5-year reauthorization of farm policies and nutrition programs. Follow the House live, as always, here on C-SPAN. Washington Journal airs live every morning at 7 a.m. Eastern here on C-SPAN, and tomorrow our guests include Texas Congressman Mac Thornberry. He'll discuss the G8 summit and recent international conflicts. Then Connecticut Representative Rosa DeLauro on the Farm Bill being debated in the House and her work to preserve federal food stamp programs. And then Tom Taylor of Bloomberg BNA looks at recent Supreme Court decisions. That's all ahead tomorrow morning on Washington Journal.
is passed, and without objection, a motion to reconsider is laid on the table. For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition? Or, excuse me, the gentlelady from North Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I send to the desk a privilege report from the Committee on Rules for filing under the rule.
The clerk will report the title.
Report to accompany House Resolution 266, resolution providing for consideration of the bill H.R. 1947 to provide for the reform and continuation of agricultural and other programs of the Department of Agriculture through fiscal year 2018 and for other purposes, and providing for consideration of the bill H.R. 1797 to amend Title 18 United States Code to protect pain-capable unborn children in the District of Columbia and for other purposes.
Referred to the House calendar and ordered printed.
Speaker. Mr. Speaker.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that my name be removed as a co-sponsor of H.R. 1797, the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act.
Without objection, so ordered. For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I present a privileged report for printing under the rule.
The clerk will report the title.
Report to accompany H.R. 2397, a bill making appropriations for the Department of Defense for the fiscal year ending September 30th, 2014, and for other purposes.
Referred to the Union calendar and ordered printed pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 21, points of order are reserved. The Chair lays before the House the following personal request.
Leave of absence requested for Mr. Lamborn of Colorado for today.
Without objection, the request is granted. The Chair will now entertain requests for 1-minute speeches. For what purpose does the gentleman for Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to rise, address the House for 1 minute, revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Well, Mr. Speaker, today the White House's permanent campaign machine released a television ad promoting the Affordable Care Act, and unfortunately it aims to completely mislead the public. The ad claims that Americans are seeing better coverage and lower costs because of the Affordable Care Act. That is pure fantasy. The fact is, premiums have been ratcheting upward across the country. On average, rates in Ohio will go up to almost $200 a month because of this law, and it's the same story state by state. These rising costs clearly have the administration worried that people are going to understand how bad the Affordable Care Act is. Enroll America is set to spend tens of millions of dollars in promoting this law. This is money that they raised by using current and former administration officials to unethically, if not illegally, strong-arm donations from health care companies that are regulated by the Department of Health and Human Services. The administration put together a law that hurts families, and now they got to spend tens of millions of dollars telling people that, hey, it ain't so bad. Mr. Speaker, this is a travesty. It should be stopped. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, this last week, the International Energy Agency came out with a very important report about climate change. They said that if we don't act soon, we're going to see extreme weather events, droughts, hurricanes, all sorts of flooding, real serious problems for our children and our grandchildren. But the important thing in this report is if we do act now, we can avert some of those horrible consequences that will face our children and especially our grandchildren. I want to urge the Congress to take this report seriously and let us start acting to protect future generations and this planet. We only have one atmosphere. We share with everyone else. Let's not pollute it so that the carbon emissions and greenhouse gases continue to heat the planet and cause climate problems that we're already witnessing today. Let's move. It'll help our economy as well as our environment.
Gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman, Pennsylvania, seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, revised and extended.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, America is blessed with abundant, clean, and affordable natural gas. As the amount of known natural gas reserves continually increases, we're also blessed with the technology to be environmentally responsible when accessing this resource. In my home state of Pennsylvania, the discovery and extraction of the Marcellus Shale has been transforming. During the difficult years of an economy in recession, unemployment numbers in the Keystone State have remained well below the national rates. We can attribute a substantial portion of this prosperity to development related to this plentiful natural resource. A study by the Allegheny Institute for Public Policy is a recent testament to this fact. The report shows that rents and royalties reported on Pennsylvania income tax returns from 2006 to 2010 have increased 61% statewide and 119% in counties with Marcellus Shale activity. Mr. Speaker, we must continue to responsibly develop this resource so that we ensure it offers future generations the same and greater economic opportunities. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Arizona seek recognition?
Speak for 1 minute, without objection.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise tonight as the father of 2 strong and accomplished women and the grandfather of 3 grandchildren to speak against H.R. 1797 that will come before the House tomorrow, in which we'll be asked yet again to put government in charge of a woman's private medical decisions. We must protect the right of every woman to make her health care decisions with her doctor and without the interference by politicians in Washington. Only she can decide what's best for her and her family. This is an issue of personal liberty. The Supreme Court ruled more than half a century ago that Americans have the right to make their own choices about reproductive health. And yet once again, we will debate a new piece of legislation to limit the rights of women. I will oppose H.R. 1797 tomorrow, and I strongly urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to do the same, to stand up for women and oppose the latest attempt to intrude into their most personal health care decisions. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Louisiana seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to speak to the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, what do you get when you add the Senate's amnesty immigration bill to Obamacare? More people losing their jobs. Obamacare mandates that employers with 50 or more full-time employees provide government-approved health insurance or pay a penalty. Many businesses with around 50 employees already say they'll cut some full-timers to part-time positions to avoid this penalty. But that's not all. The Senate immigration bill would give legal status to about 11 million people who came here illegally. And employers could hire any of those 11 million without counting them toward the Obamacare mandate. So employers who are trying to make ends meet and balance a budget are being told by their government that they can save money by unloading full-time, hard-working American citizens and replacing them with immigrants who are here on a provisional status. I know my colleagues on the other side will say we should just add 11 million. But I think that's the wrong thing to do. Let's repeal Obamacare. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
To address the House more for 1 minute, revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
This week marks the 50th annual National Small Business Week, where we recognize the importance of the entrepreneurs and small businesses who work hard to fulfill the promise of the American dream. I saw this firsthand as a Dublin planning commissioner and later as a city council member, that when small businesses get off the ground and succeed, the entire community around it benefits and our economy grows. In fact, more than 1/2 of all Americans either own or work for a small business, and they account for about 2 out of every 3 new jobs created every year. This Saturday, I went from storefront to storefront in downtown Hayward to speak to local small business owners in my congressional district. To help address the problems that I heard about not having enough capital to start up or not having enough business-to-business transactions or foot traffic, I introduced the Main Street Revival Act. My bill will allow certain small businesses to elect to defer paying federal payroll taxes in the first year of operation to help offset their costs. Small businesses form the backbone of our communities, and opening new storefronts, training American workers, and selling goods in our neighborhoods. It's through supporting them that we expand economic opportunity and help make the American dream a reality. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back the balance of my time.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Minnesota seek recognition?
Ask unanimous consent to address for House for 1 minute, revising some remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Well, Mr. Speaker, recently I held a telephone town hall meeting with 7,000 of my constituents, and a good part of our conversation centered on our economy's anemic economic job growth and lackluster job creation. One woman that I spoke to, whose name was Gloria, she's a small business owner in Chanhassen, and she expressed her deep frustration with the growing weight of new regulations on her business and on small businesses. Mr. Speaker, Americans are burdened with $2 trillion nearly every year of new regulations, and with the number only increasing. Since 2008, 156 new major regulations have been instituted, adding about $90 billion in regulatory costs to the economy and stifling economic growth and job creation. This needs to be fixed. Congress should have more control over a growing bureaucracy by requiring that elected representatives sign off on those new rules and regulations that would have a major economic impact. Cutting red tape will help lower one more hurdle that is impeding opportunity for new jobs and job growers and creators and entrepreneurs like Gloria, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, to revise and extend my remarks, and to submit extraneous material to the record.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On March 14th, Lori Bresnahan, a school librarian who lived in my district, and a 10-year-old child were attacked at a shopping center parking lot. The attacker was facing federal child pornography charges and was out on bail, ordered to wear an electronic monitoring bracelet. He disabled the bracelet, stabbed Ms. Bresnahan to death, and sexually assaulted the young girl. It was later found that he had tampered with the bracelet 47 times, and each time the federal probation office in Syracuse did not respond. I wrote to the Administrative Office of the United States Courts asking them to investigate this gross negligence. This is their response. The director says nothing can excuse the deficiencies in supervision of this case. But he also says reduced resources due to the sequester is harming efforts to keep it from happening again. He continued that we are bracing for even larger reductions next year. Mr. Speaker, an innocent woman was stabbed to death. An innocent child was sexually assaulted. And the answer from the courts is that their ability to keep it from happening again is limited because their funding was cut. This is unacceptable. To Lori Bresnahan and that young girl, we owe a full investigation, not excuses. Mr. Speaker, we owe them the guarantee that this cannot happen again. We owe them an end to the sequester cuts affecting our federal probation system.
Gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, English as a second language, Pashto to English, Arabic to English, art, life skills, computers, personal health, wellness, finance, business. Sounds like courses at a swanky New England university, but these are just a few classes offered at Getmo University in the Caribbean. That's not all. These terrorists get training in resume writing and interviewing. Are they going someplace? And what do they put on that resume? Professional bomb maker? If they get bored with class, they can meander over to the detainee library with its 17,000 books, video games, and CDs. More still, terrorists have access to the fancy new taxpayer-funded $750,000 soccer field, play volleyball, basketball, table tennis, and even foosball. Lastly, they get cultural religious training. Ironic, since these radicals kill in the name of religion. Mr. Speaker, why does the government spend millions to train and entertain those who kill Americans? However, this is just another day for the 166 terrorists, trainers,
Gentleman's time has
financiers,
expired.
Osama bin Laden bodyguards at Gitmo University in the Caribbean. And that's just the way it is.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, earlier this month, the National Unemployment Report was released for this past May. While some Americans were able to find low-paying jobs, I remain extremely disappointed with this sluggish economic recovery. For example, parts of my district in the Central Valley are still suffering from 30% unemployment, and this is simply unacceptable. The economic downturn caused by burdensome regulations, regulatory policies at the state and federal levels cannot continue. Our communities should be growing, our businesses should be expanding, and our families should be able to provide a better life for their children. This can be done by allowing safe oil and natural gas exploration and providing a clean, reliable water supply for Central Valley farmers, farm workers, and their communities. My constituents have faced chronic unemployment for too long. It is time for Washington bureaucrats to get out of the way and let America prosper. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. Are there any additional requests for 1 minute? For what purpose does the gentlelady from Texas seek recognition?
Address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you. Ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm very pleased today to say that members have joined me in introducing H.Res. 268, which is observing the historical significance of Juneteenth Independence Day, which is going to be this Wednesday, June 19th. And I hope that all of those across America will understand the meaning of Juneteenth, which is to express a celebration for the freeing of the slaves, which did not come to the southwestern states like Texas until almost 2 years later. That was 1865, after 1863. Mr. Speaker, I want to quickly change the topic and indicate that I believe it's important to get an understanding of the alleged individual who has been leaking the NSA. I've been restrained as to call him anything until the laws determine who he is. But I do believe that we're now tipping the scales of fairness when more and more is coming out in a foreign country, and I do believe something has to be done. I'll be introducing legislation on the reduction of private intel utilization, explanation of FISA court opinions, and strengthening the FISA court because I believe that it is extremely important in strengthening the public trust, but strengthening the rights of the American people, and we have to do it, and we have to be able to find this gentleman quickly so that the intelligence that will protect Americans will be done. I thank the gentleman. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I realize that there are many in schools that are not taught as much history as they should now because they're teaching to this ridiculous test. But it is important we learn from history. And right now in Syria, we have rebels that are backed by al-Qaeda, and this administration and even some in this building want to rush to the aid of the al-Qaeda-backed rebels, while there are others that say, well, maybe we'd be better off if Assad stayed in power. It's a lose-lose situation for the United States, and when that's the case, it's time to stay out. Maybe early on, before al-Qaeda got so powerful, it had been time to do something. But when it is a national security risk, when we get involved in an entangling situation like that, it's time to look back. What caused World War I? Entangling alliances. Does the entangling alliances involving Russia and so many other countries in Syria ring bells? It's time the bells rang and we stayed out.
Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 3rd, 2013, the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Collins, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous materials on the subject of my special order.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in another of the series of Republican freshman class special orders, this time to focus on our nation's need for regulatory reform and regulatory relief. As an American and a parent, I value the role of responsible regulations. Many regulations were designed with personal safety in mind, and these regulations make our workforce stronger. All too often, however, the federal government designs regulations that are often unnecessary and achieve little or no benefit at very high cost. These regulations directly impact the hardworking men and women of Northeast Georgia and across the nation. Over the next hour, my colleagues and I will discuss the growing problem of regulation and why our nation's economy so desperately needs regulatory relief. It is now, I am pleased to yield 5 minutes to the president of our freshman class, my dear friend and a tireless worker on this issue as well, Mr. Messer.
Thank you. I want to thank my good friend from Georgia, Mr. Collins, for recognizing me and for leading this Republican freshman class special order on the need for regulatory reform. I also want to commend him and the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Yoho, for their initiative in creating the Freshman Regulatory Reform Working Group, of which I am pleased to be a member. A recent editorial written by George Washington University professor Jonathan Turley declared that, quote, our carefully constructed system of checks and balances is being negated by the rise of a fourth branch, an administrative state of sprawling departments and agencies that govern with increasing autonomy and decreasing transparency, end quote. The voice of the American people is marginalized when this so-called fourth state of government, our federal agencies, fail to follow the wishes of their elected representatives or make policy in the absence of direction by Congress. And the American people are paying the price of this regulatory maze created by this unelected government. For example, the Heritage Foundation has found that annual regulatory costs increased by more than $23.5 billion during President Obama's fourth year in office. The total cost of regulations during the President's first term were nearly $70 billion, a level unmatched by any previous administration. It's time to unshackle America from the stranglehold these regulations have on our economy. I again want to thank Mr. Collins and Mr. Yoho for leading efforts among the freshman Republicans to eliminate and streamline burdensome federal regulations. I look forward to working with them and all members of the House to help create jobs by allowing America's businesses to grow and innovate by reining in the unelected bureaucracy standing in their way. Thank you.
And I thank the gentleman from Indiana. I think you bring up a great point, and that's this issue of an unelected bureaucracy that is forcing sometimes businesses who just want to create, want to expand, and want to do those things. I appreciate your interest in this, and we're going to continue to take this fight because this matters to real people. This matters to Main Street. And when we've mattered to Main Street, then people understand what we're trying to do up here. And I think they then begin to have confidence in Washington has their best interest at heart.
And I would just add, I think sometimes this comes from both sides. In other words, there are times when laws passed by Congress are intentionally vague, so that the bureaucracy steps in and leaders are able to say, hey, blame it on those regulators. I think we have a responsibility to make sure that we're making laws specific enough and simple enough to be understood by the American people.
Well, I agree with that. I thank the gentleman from Indiana, and I appreciate his work on this. It's now my pleasure to represent not only someone who has come to Congress and fired up about the issues that are going on, but has become my co-chair on this regulatory working group and bringing forth, I believe, a lot of things that need to be brought forward in a fresh perspective from Florida, and it is my pleasure now to yield 5 minutes to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Yoho.
I thank my good friend from Georgia for yielding, and I appreciate the comments. I'd like to title this talk, Burdensome Regulations, the Dysfunctional Government Tax. More than $14,000 every year. $14,000 every year. That's what the average American family loses out on because of federal regulations, either in taxes or lower wages, because their employers are carrying that burden. How do we even get all these regulations? More than 6,000 regulations just this year. It happens when the executive branch goes around Congress to create their own policies. Some people call this legislation through regulation. I call it the dysfunctional government tax. It's the $40 a day every American has to pay because of the executive branch won't go through Congress. It won't work with those of us who are here tonight because we were sent here by the people. In more places in my district, you could take your spouse out for a nice dinner for $40. A person could fill up their gas tank in a minivan for about $40, or you could take your children to a matinee movie on the weekends for $40. When I'm home in my district, I hear from people who own their own business and from people who just care about their work about how federal regulations are making it harder to make ends meet. We're going to talk about a few of these regulations tonight, but let me tell you about a few stories from North Central Florida. There's a lumber company in my district that has to aim lower. By that I mean versus aiming higher to expand their business, and this is because of the burden of the Affordable Care Act. It's too great to bear. They would love nothing more than to hire more people, more workers, or buy that extra piece of equipment, but there's no telling what the compliance cost of the ACA will be. Not only that these poor folks are subject to the rules and perhaps fines based on the discretion or interpretation of whatever inspector happens upon them that day. There is no certainty, and I think that's one of the biggest roles that we have to do, is create certainty in the environment of the workplace so that businesses can go forward and expand their businesses. To create a stable economy, we need a stable environment for businesses to work in. The over-regulations we've seen in recent years creates neither. An example I just heard this today. I got a fella in our district, he's a watermelon grower, and an interpretation of a rule from the Food Safety Modernization Act, commonly called FSMA. This rule says that the use of water bottles cannot be used by workers in the field when they are picking the melons. Now, I don't know if words can describe just how hot and humid it gets in Florida during this time of year, but it gets pretty darn hot. Not allowing water in the fields is tantamount to cruel and unusual punishment. Even more ridiculous are the protesters that have been out there, they've been placed on the site, that talk about the risk of heat, or the posters that have been put out there to talk about the heat stress. And what you see here is a poster that's put up by one of the regulatory agencies warning people about heat stress, but yet they won't let you take water into the field to pick watermelons. And these are some of the regulations that they don't make any sense, and it causes confusion in the workplace. Another example comes from Florida, has to do with the poultry recycling program. This act was amended in 1997 to include new definitions. Poultry products that have been below 26 degrees Fahrenheit may not be labeled as fresh. Such labeled product is considered misbranded. A company I know had a USDA inspector come out and identified poultry label as fresh, and they said that the product was below 26 degrees Fahrenheit. Due to the rule, the product was detained. Now, keep in mind that as a veterinarian, I can tell you that this poses no safety risk to the average consumer, to any consumer. After 4 months of engaging the agency with time and money spent on litigation, the USDA changed the rule to allow poultry frozen below 26 Fahrenheit to be labeled as fresh as long as they sold the product to end users like hospitals and restaurants. Precisely. This is the business that this company was selling their product to all along. The bottom line is it wound up costing them 4 months of lost revenues, and the rule cost this business $681,000, and they had absolutely no way to recoup their losses. These things have got to change because they wind up stifling the entrepreneur. And what we have is the regulatory agencies that start out to make the public safer, whether on the job or on the highway or the foods we eat. And it's a good thing. But what happens is they often overstep their authority, and often it is the interpretation of that rule by the inspector that gets the misinterpretation, and the end result is the owner gets fined and sometimes has to shut down until the situation gets resolved. Yes, we want safer workplaces, safer highways, cleaner air and water, but we shouldn't impede the very people trying to create jobs. Our government agencies should be a facilitator to our businesses, not a debilitator to these businesses. After all, with the lack of the extra regulations up to this point in our history, I think it's worked pretty good. that we shouldn't overstep that boundary, and we need to have common sense regulations, and I yield back the remainder of my time. Thank you, sir.
Well, I appreciate the gentleman from Florida's comments. It is amazing some of the things that we're hearing and the examples just simply by putting out there. I want to extend an invitation to especially our freshman class, but others who may want to join us in this regulatory working group. Just contact our offices. We'd love to hear your input as we go forward. It's now my pleasure to welcome and also recognize for time the gentlelady from Missouri, Ms. Wagner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I request unanimous consent to address the House.
Without objection.
I thank the gentleman from Georgia, Congressman Collins, for putting a special order together. Mr. Speaker, in his time served in office thus far, President Obama has said he's for the reduction of government red tape that places an unnecessary burden on the American people. Again and again, he has extolled the virtues of transparency and bipartisanship in an effort to put people back to work. But if we look at his track record, this has simply turned out to be yet another string of broken promises and a failure of leadership. In his first term alone, President Obama has finalized 130 major rules, a shocking 160% increase over the previous term under President George W. Bush. This alarming growth in government is an assault on our free enterprise system and on our individual liberties. Either the President is not interested in keeping the American people's trust, or he simply does not have a handle on his own federal agencies. Given recent events, either of these could very well be true. The truth, Mr. Speaker, however, is that costs from new regulatory burdens on Americans increased by nearly $70 billion during President Obama's first term in office, which are based on his own agency's estimates. It is very possible that the real costs far exceed this number. And with major regulations in Dodd-Frank and Obamacare still yet to be implemented, these burdens on small businesses and the American people will only skyrocket. Dodd-Frank alone required government bureaucrats to write nearly 400 new rules, and yet 3 years later, we have barely completed a third of them. Most of the law's provisions have little or no connection to the financial crisis that prompted their creation in the first place. As a member of the Financial Services Committee, I have witnessed firsthand the arbitrary and irrelevant these rules can be and how they cost the American people jobs and their hard-earned savings. We can and must do more to hold these agencies accountable and stop this governance by fiat and the bypassing of Congress, we the people. This is why we must pass the REINS Act, which I'm a proud co-sponsor. This legislation would rein in the federal agencies and would require Congress to approve every new major rule proposed by the executive branch having an annual economic impact of $100 million or more. It would allow Congress to regain our constitutional authority by limiting the size and scope of the rulemaking powers of government bureaucrats who were not elected. Mr. Speaker, the American people are fed up with this big government agenda. It's time to hold this administration accountable for the gross overreach of their powers, whether it's regulation from the EPA or regulations implementing Dodd-Frank or Obamacare. Enough is enough. The American people are tired of this government overstepping their constitutional authority. And I yield back.
Well, I appreciate the gentlewoman from Missouri. She is right. That's the anger that we feel and we hear from our constituents when they just don't understand what's going on here, and we need to continue that. I appreciate those words. It's now my pleasure to yield time to the gentleman from Kentucky to provide an insight into what we're seeing right now as regulatory gone amok in a lot of ways.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the opportunity to participate in this special order this evening. This is a very important topic, and I applaud my colleagues, Mr. Collins and Mr. Yoho, for forming the Freshman Working Group on Regulatory Reform. And regulatory reform is desperately needed in this country to get our economy back on track. We have seen persistent high unemployment in our country for the last 5 years.
We got another bad jobs report just last week. 7.6% is the unemployment rate. But even more alarming than our persistent high unemployment rate is the fact that we have underemployment in this country. Only 58% of the American people who are eligible for employment, who are of working age population, are actually employed. Only 58%. Yes, we have a high unemployment rate. Yes, it's been persistently over 7.5% for the last 5 years. But even more troubling is the fact that only 58% of working-age people in this country are employed. That is 5% below the average employment rate for working-age people prior to the recession. And that number has been static for the last 5 years. So the question we have to ask ourselves is why is this happening? Why are the American people not getting back to the work? Well, one of the primary impediments to economic recovery, to job growth and job creation, is the avalanche of new rules, regulations, and red tape coming out of Washington, all of which impose huge costs on businesses and create a destructive environment of uncertainty in the private sector. And it affects virtually every sector of our economy. It affects the healthcare sector with Obamacare and the reams of regulations coming out of HHS. It affects the financial services industry with Dodd-Frank and all of the rulemakings. You know, Dodd-Frank authorizes over 400 new rules and regulations. A little more than half of those have been issued. According to certain estimates, compliance with those regulations equals about 24 million hours annually in man-hours to comply with the Dodd-Frank rules and regulations. To put that in perspective, 20 million man-hours was what was required to build the Panama Canal. This is literally an avalanche of rules and regulations crushing our financial institutions, impeding access to credit for entrepreneurs and small businesses. It's affecting the energy sector, where environmental regulations are destroying jobs. And in my home state, the coal industry has been devastated by the EPA's assault on the coal industry through overregulation of the energy sector. In most countries that conduct mining activities, about 2 years is the average length of time for a regulator to review an application for mining. In the United States today, it takes 7 years for EPA regulators just to review and approve a surface mining permit. So this backlog and this overregulation of mining activities is resulting in massive layoffs. Mining in Central Appalachia is at its lowest production level since 1965. We've lost 4,000 coal mining jobs in just the last couple of years in eastern Kentucky as a result of the EPA's overzealous overregulation of the coal industry. Yes, it's driving utility rates higher. Yes, it is certainly bad in terms of low-cost electricity for our manufacturers and small businesses and our seniors on fixed income, but it's also costing jobs, and it's having a negative impact on all of those people whose paychecks take care of their families. We talked about the impact on health care. I had an administrator of a local small hospital in central Kentucky tell me that it used to be that they took care of patients. Today they take care of paper. A small banker, community banker in eastern Kentucky told me that it used to be in the community banking business that they would provide loans and make a business decision based on the creditworthiness of the borrower, whether it was a farmer or a small business owner or an entrepreneur. Today, this banker says that the government makes that decision for them because of the avalanche of new rules and regulations. There's another important dimension to this, in addition to impeding economic recovery, and that's our Constitution. For the last 80 years, the growth of the administrative state has been a huge detractor from the original meaning of our Constitution. It has been offensive to the separation of powers doctrine. And one need only look to Article 1, Section 1 of the U.S. Constitution, which simply reads, quote, all legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States, which shall consist of a Senate and a House of Representatives. Mr. Speaker, the word all should be recognized as granting the Congress exclusive legislative power. And yet, for the last 80 years, as the administrative state has grown in Washington, the Congress has delegated its lawmaking powers to unaccountable, unelected bureaucrats in the executive branch. And so what we need to do in Congress is we need to rehabilitate what's known as the non-delegation doctrine, the idea that Congress shouldn't delegate away its lawmaking powers to another branch of government. In the last several years, we've seen a dramatic growth in the regulatory burden on the private economy. The pages in the Code of Federal Regulations hit an all-time high of 174,000 pages in 2012. That's an increase of more than 21% during the last decade. In 2012, the cost of federal rules exceeded $1.8 trillion, roughly equal to the gross domestic product of Canada, which is about $1.81 trillion, and India, $1.82 trillion. The regulatory burden costs each U.S. household approximately $14,768, meaning that red tape is now the second largest item in the typical family budget after housing. And in 2012, 4,062 federal regulations were at various stages of implementation. The government completed work on 1,172, an increase of 16% over the 1,010 that the feds imposed in 2011, which was a 40% increase over the 722 in 2010. And another measure of the regulatory burden, the pages in the Federal Register. By that measure, the Obama administration did not break the all-time record of 81,405 pages it set in 2010. But the 78,961 pages it churned out in 2012 mean that the President has posted 3 of the 4 greatest paperwork years on record. Mr. Speaker, this avalanche of red tape is strangling American economic recovery. It is an offense to the Constitution of the United States, and it lacks all common sense. For the sake of the U.S. Constitution, for the sake of economic recovery, for the sake of common sense, and for the sake of the American people who are suffering in one of the worst economic downturns since the Great Depression, we need to rein in burdensome regulations. And I thank the gentleman for yielding, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Well, I appreciate the gentleman because he brings a good point. I think it would behoove all of us. We hear often on this floor we need to talk about jobs. We need to talk about job creation. And what we're finding right here is the very thing that is coming out of this bureaucracy and this red tape is job killing. And I think this is something we could find common ground on. I think it's a little bit of an agenda issue here, though. When you come to Congress, you look to those who have stood the fight before you. And I am pleased tonight to yield some time to the gentleman from Indiana, sponsor of the REINS Act, Ms. Young, who has fought this fight before we got here, and I am pleased to welcome him as an honorary freshman tonight as part of the sophomore class because you've led the way, and I appreciate that, and I'm happy to yield time to you tonight.
Well, I thank so much the gentleman from Georgia for his hard work on this issue, working with our colleague, Mr. Yoho of Florida, in organizing this freshman initiative designed to tackle overly burdensome regulations, ensure that we produce smart regulations here at the federal level, and alleviate some of the pain during this very down economy that so many Americans are facing. You know, when you talk about regulations, this is not some arcane issue. These are the rules we live by, just like the legislation that emerges out of this body. It impacts our jobs, our economic growth, the level of personal income that Americans enjoy. It impacts the number of long-term unemployed we have in this country, and right now we're at a historic low. It impacts these things and so many others. People have too many hassles, too many burdens, too many anxieties, and regulations are a big part of the reason why. There are direct costs of regulations that come out of the alphabet soup agencies that populate Washington, D.C. There are compliance costs that our small businesses in particular must contend with. There's a great deal of uncertainty associated with the regulations being developed in the buildings around Washington, D.C. And regulations lead to an increase in the cost of our goods and services produced, thus making us less competitive economically vis-a-vis our international competitors. Regulations reduce oftentimes the productivity of our workers, which drives down their wages, which hurts our competitiveness once again. So what's the solution to this? Well, we here in Congress, especially folks on this side of the aisle, although I have to say this doesn't have to be a partisan issue, and historically it has not always been. I think that's a good thing. But we on this side of the aisle have been trying to alleviate the pain that many businesses and Americans feel by the costliest regulations coming out of Washington, D.C. I think that is proper, and I think we should continue to do so. But I also believe it's time for us to consider a comprehensive approach to improving the entire regulatory process. And so that's why I have introduced in this 113th Congress the REINS Act. Now, what the REINS Act does is it establishes a $100 million threshold. This is the threshold established historically by our Office of Management and Budget for a so-called major regulation. And every major regulation, after it goes through the public hearing process, under the REINS Act, it has to go before Congress for an up or down vote before it can become the law of the land. This would improve immeasurably the quality of regulations that come out of Washington, D.C. It would slow down the regulatory process, to be sure. But let's remember our founding fathers devised a system where they wanted people in Washington to deliberate before we acted. This would lead to more deliberation, wiser judgment. This would also allow the American people, the citizens of this great country, to weigh in on given regulations, ones they feel passionately about. And most importantly, the REINS Act would hold members of Congress accountable for the regulations that come out of Washington. You know, of course, it would allow us to tame some of the executive agencies that have gone rogue from time to time, that pass unwise regulations. But I think more importantly, it would allow those who elect us to bodies like this to hold us accountable for the things that cause pain to them, those imperial regulations that are promulgated from a distant capital, which our founding fathers were so upset about when this nation was founded. To the issue of congressional accountability, too many vague laws are made in this body. Dodd-Frank, the Affordable Care Act, I could go on and on. We kick the can down the road, as is often heard, on sticky issues, politically sensitive issues that politicians don't want to deal with. Because we know ultimately there will be regulators to fill in the gaps of our vague laws. Well, the REINS Act would prevent that. It would incentivize members of Congress to take on the hard issues in the beginning, because they'd know that in the end those issues are going to come back and have to be resolved in this body. You know, when I go home and meet with small business people and individual constituents and they speak to me about specific regulations that are causing them pain, oftentimes the best I can do and my colleagues can do is say, listen, you know, we'll try and repeal that particular regulations by preventing it from being implemented at the agency, by impacting the funding of that agency. These are very difficult things to do, and it's so incredibly difficult to identify all the bad regulations that are out there. But under the REINS Act, that would no longer be an acceptable excuse to my constituents. Unelected bureaucrats in the end would not be accountable. Members of Congress would, and that is the intent in the end of the REINS Act. Now, I believe in regulations, smart regulations. And this bill is about improving the regulatory process so that here in the United States of America, this remains a vibrant place to live with a growing economy. Our rules must be balanced against economic concerns. The American people must have a voice about what those rules will be, and Congress cannot skirt responsibility to legislate. Again, I'd like to close here by thanking those who led this effort, Mr. Collins in particular, for leading the floor conversation this evening. You've shown some great leadership as a freshman. You're working very hard. I know you came here, as did other members of the freshman class of the 113th Congress, to make a difference. By supporting the REINS Act, I think you'll help advance that cause in a very big way. I yield back.
Well, I appreciate it. It's always easy to follow in the footsteps of those who fought the fight before us, and I appreciate what you've done and others have done, and we're going to continue that fight because this matters to Americans, and that's what we got to continue on. So I thank you for being here tonight. It is now with great pleasure another freshman who has come from just north of me in North Carolina, who has passionately fought for his constituents, but also sees this from a different perspective, and I want to, at this time, yield time for the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Holden.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the gentleman from Georgia for the opportunity to discuss this administration's excessive regulation. We know the harmful effect that overregulation has had on the economy. And since taking office, President Obama and his administration have continuously burdened the American people with an exceptional number of regulations harming businesses and the economy. Mr. Speaker, small businesses in this country are essential to our economic stability. Small businesses encourage innovation and hard work. It's the American dream to have a unique idea and build something from scratch. And that, Mr. Speaker, is exactly what small businesses do. Mr. Speaker, small businesses have created 64% of net new jobs over the past 15 years and employed just over half of all private sector employees. In this stalled economy, small businesses are already struggling to be successful, and we need to take some of the current regulatory weight off their shoulders. Recently, back home, I spent the week going around to different chambers of commerce in my district. I went to Wake Forest, I went to Fuquay-Varina, I went to Apex, I went to Nashville, Rocky Mount, and met with several hundred small business owners and folks who work in small businesses. And of course, you know, I had the constant complaint of overregulation, and I started asking the question. I said, has the government done anything that you know of in the last 5 years which would make your life as a small business person better? I got no positive responses, Mr. Speaker. That's stunning. New regulations are complicated, and compliance is time-consuming and expensive. And sometimes job creators aren't informed of new regulations in a timely manner, giving them little time to prepare to comply with them. Business owners and their employees are now facing a time of uncertainty due to regulations. They're not confident in government policy coming out of Washington, and they have no trust in the ability of Washington to do things that are in their better interest. This sense of uncertainty, Mr. Speaker, may prevent an employer from hiring more people or force them to let go of current employees. As Mr. Yoho said earlier in his comments, you know, he has small businesses in his district that are having to shoot lower rather than shoot higher. Small businesses may have to reevaluate how and when they do businesses, and that is unfortunate. But small businesses have no confidence in their government to give them pro-growth policies. Excessive regulation harms not only individual small businesses, but our country's growth as a whole. The Small Business Office of Advocacy has reported that federal rulemaking has imposed a cumulative burden of $1.75 trillion on our economy. And earlier this year in the Judiciary Committee, in which I serve, we heard testimony that in the past 4 years alone, the cumulative burden has increased by $520 billion. Mr. Speaker, I'm not only concerned about the negative effect of regulations on our overall economy, but also the administration's abuse of power. President Obama has been encouraged by regulatory advocates to circumvent regular order and imposed his climate change agenda through regulations, and he made it clear in his State of the Union speech earlier this year his intent to do so. I'm also concerned with the fact that the administration has repeatedly missed its required deadline for releasing a unified agenda of federal regulatory and deregulatory actions twice a year. This agenda lays out each governmental agency's proposed regulation and annual regulatory plan, and businesses need to know this information so they can anticipate how forthcoming regulations will affect them. And this administration needs to have more accountability and more transparency about the harmful effects of these abundant, may I say, excessive regulations. Mr. Speaker, in my district in North Carolina, many of the towns rely on small businesses. That's all there's there, is small businesses. And whether it's a local restaurant owned by the same family for generations, or an accounting firm, or a clothing store, or the town doctor, regulations are a major concern for them. And we should be doing what we can do to encourage small businesses, not deter them with strenuous and excessive regulations. I yield back.
Well, I thank the gentleman from North Carolina. I mean, what we're dealing here is dealing with jobs. And I think what you shared in your time back in the district is small businesses, as we've seen, small businesses protect 44% of the total U.S. private payroll and create more than half of the non-farm jobs in the gross domestic product here. We've got to look at this. This is something that I think we could all come together, as the gentleman from Indiana stated just a few moments ago. This could be a bipartisan issue as we look to jobs and things we can bring to the floor. I know in talking to you, and you're passionate about this, we came up here to try and help. We came up here to bring the voices of those who could not be up here on a given day to help them in their businesses and work hard. And I appreciate you so much for sharing your experiences from North Carolina and really what we're doing fighting hard against these regulations so that we can see more jobs created.
Well, as my friend from Georgia knows, numbers don't lie. And when we are spending $1.75 trillion a year complying with regulations, that's a lot of money.
It is that. Well, I appreciate the gentleman for being here tonight. You know, it was just, and I think this is something that we all see. In fact, in a 2011 speech, President Barack Obama stated that rules have gotten out of balance, and the result is a chilling effect on growth and jobs. You know, I believe the President's correct about that. The rules have become so skewed that our nation's regulatory system is at war with Americans' businesses. In fact, he went ahead and even in executive order stated the last barriers we're trying to remove and those are outdated, unnecessary regulations. I've ordered a government-wide review, and if there are rules on the books that are needlessly stifling job creation and economic growth, we will fix them. I tell you what, I'll agree with the President on this, and I want to say this is something that we can move forward with, and it's something that has an effect because right now these burdens are killing American industry and American jobs. Where they're having to, when businesses are more concerned right now, 40% is what I've seen in the latest survey from Morgan Stanley, said 40% of companies say policy uncertainty in Washington is preventing them from putting investments and job creation to work. This is something we've got to be a part of fixing because it matters, and it matters for jobs. Industries such as manufacturing, technology are fighting to compete in a global market, but they first must survive the regulatory beast that is strangling innovation and growth. Congress should be encouraging innovation and make it easier for businesses to bring new products or processes to the market. Outdated regulations should be cleared off the books, especially those created by unelected bureaucrats. Let's go back to the basics of regulatory overhaul and restore a common-sense approach to regulations that encourage innovation and allows job creators to thrive. I wrote to all the businesses in Northeast Georgia and asked them to tell me how regulations are impacting their ability to grow and create jobs. Here are some of the responses that we received back. One response said, due to new regulations that require businesses to issue 1099s to virtually every employee that we write a check to, we have to be more selective when we consider a new hire. I no longer have the opportunity to give unemployed folks a shot at the job to see how they're going to do. We have to make them full regular employees right out of the chute, so we just don't look at hiring as many people. We look at other employees to work more hours. Another of my constituents said that the biggest issue we face from the federal government is the EPA's lack of approval of products in a timely manner and their removal of excellent safe products from the market altogether. You see, unfortunately, regulatory burdens created by the EPA are all too common story. A business owner in Northeast Georgia wrote to me that currently the EPA is requiring off-road diesel engines to meet new tiers or levels of exhaust emission standards. These new standards are changing every 1 to 2 years. The final, this person wrote, we hope will be in place by 2015. The result is of the dramatic and frequent changes in regulation is the complete redesign of our products, which would allow us to retool and move manufacturing to the U.S. cannot happen effectively until 2015. At that time, we hope to move manufacturing of our products back to Georgia. I say hope to because the rapid rise in regulations under the current administration may cause us not to move production at all. We are all for protecting the environment and are being good corporate citizens. However, the new regulations are burdensome, they're costly, and add no value to the productivity of the product or the marketplace. You know, I couldn't have said that better myself. Regulations should be expedient, unambiguous, minimizing the uncertainty facing industry and businesses. This is how the government can facilitate and no longer debilitate economic growth. I appreciate the comments from my colleagues tonight. It has been clear that we need regulatory relief, and it's greater now than ever. As we've heard tonight, for the first time in history, the estimated cost of regulation is more than half the federal budget itself. Let me just stop right there. For the first time in history, the estimated cost of regulation is more than half the federal budget itself. And we wonder why we're struggling with jobs right now. We wonder why our businesses are struggling with what they're going to do and how they're going to manage. You see, I'm a firm believer. It's been spoken of here tonight. There's many times we come to this House floor and we talk about things in ambiguous terms. We talk about the big picture. We talk about the process. And people hear those conversations, they hear these words, but they're not really sure how it affects them. And I'm a firm believer both from a Democrat perspective or a Republican perspective, how we can best lead is by understanding and giving people information on why this matters to them. So I'm just going to spend a few minutes here tonight talking about that. It is troubling in a time where families are struggling to make ends meet. American families are paying almost $15,000 per year in hidden regulatory taxes. $14,678 in hidden regulatory taxes. Now, you want to know how that affects. You want to know what that's going on, and you want to know how we're causing people to spend, and we're also at the same time saying we want to create new jobs, we want to create new opportunities. Well, here's what happens. Instead of paying hidden regulatory tax, American families could, one, buy a new car. A 2013 Ford Fiesta, $13,200. A 2013 Chevrolet Sonic, $14,185. We hear it all the time, how manufacturing creates jobs on all levels, starting from the manufacturing, from the parts and the dealers and the auto parts that come into this, how they all work together. Well, instead of paying these regulatory costs, why don't we get them to buy a new car? I mean, I think that's what the American people would like. I think that's what our auto dealers would like. That's what the others in the chain of automotive supply would like. But instead, they're trapped and they're bound. Most of the rules and regulations are preventing our businesses from growing a result of other things like Obamacare, and many provisions of this legislation are counterproductive. But I tell you what, I want to go back to what it means to the person sitting around the table tonight who may have just somehow turned over here and said, what are they talking about in their nation's capital? Well, what we're talking about is your pocketbook. What we're talking about is regulations that can help you spend money the way you want to. Spend money for your family's future. Spend money that revives our economy and strengthens us as a nation. This is what we're talking about. You can send their child to college. 1 year of tuition and fees at the University of Georgia is $10,262. 1 year of tuition and fees at the University of Florida, $61.50. Instead, they're trapped paying almost $15,000 in hidden regulatory tax that comes through every year. We all know the need for some rules for everyone to abide by. Make the regulations where they're simple to understand and inexpensive to comply with. Now, one of the problems I also see in Washington sometimes is we come to the floor and we talk about problems, but we never provide an answer. We never provide an answer on what can actually be done. As my colleagues and I have demonstrated, we are committed to providing regulatory relief to businesses and families. There are several key pieces of legislation that are first and important steps in alleviating the regulatory burden. The first bill I introduced in Congress was H.R. 1493, the Sunshines for Regulatory Decrees and Settlement Act of 2013. This legislation ensures the EPA cannot continue to enter into closed-door agreements with environmental groups without transparency and public participation. It does not affect the ability to bring suits. It just makes them clearer. Many of the costly rules and regulations that have impacted businesses and industries across the nation have resulted from these backroom consent decrees, and it's time we bring transparency and public participation back into the rulemaking process. What else can we do? require congressional approval for all major rules, H.R. 367. We end the sue and settle EPA settlements. That's the one I just mentioned, H.R. 1493. We can require federal agencies to choose the lowest cost rulemaking alternative, H.R. 2122. There are things that we can do. And I believe the American public is looking to this place. They're looking to their capital for real solutions. They're looking to their capital for hope. They're looking for relief. Every day, men and women get up and they wake their children up, as I did this morning, and they go to work, and they go to make a better life. Many of those are small business owners wanting to add jobs, wanting to add to their businesses, but these regulations are killing that possibility right now. I believe when you look at what we've talked about here and my colleagues have talked about here on the floor, and I appreciate all of them being here, we bring to light what is really happening, and that is that regulations are not adding anything except government jobs. It's time we get back out and add jobs in Main Street. And when we add jobs in Main Street, everybody is impacted. You know, I want to thank my colleagues for joining me tonight in highlighting why American families and businesses so desperately need regulatory relief. Our freshmen are going to continue to do this, highlighting the real work that we believe matters to families and matters to Americans, because when we're up here at doing your work. The things that you sent us here to do was to work for you. And that's what we're going to continue to do, and the freshman class are going to continue to do just that. And as we have mentioned tonight, not only are we talking about overregulation, we're going to be talking about many things in the weeks to come, and we're just letting the people know that we're here because we believe to make a difference. Along with both sides of the aisle, let's come together and see what we can do to make sure that not only regulations but other things get done so this government puts people, helps the businesses in our communities get back to work. And that's what I want to be about, and I'm glad that we were here tonight to do that. But before I close out, I do see a friend on the floor, the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Franks, and as we're through with our regulation part, I noticed that you had asked for time, and I'm going to, at this time, yield to the gentleman from Arizona, my friend, Mr. Franks.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I just want to thank the distinguished gentleman from Georgia for yielding this time. One of the great hopes that I see that portends for a better future for America is to see men like Doug Collins join this group and this Congress. Mr. Speaker, you know, it seems like we are never quite so eloquent as when we are decrying the crimes of a past generation. While we oftentimes remain as staggering blind as some of our most intellectually sightless predecessors when it comes to facing and rejecting atrocities in our own time. Whether it was slavery or the many human genocides across history, the patterns were the same. Mr. Speaker, innocent human beings, children of God all, were systematically dehumanized and then subjected to the most horrifying inhumanity. All the while, human society as a whole at first hardened their hearts and turned away. But, Mr. Speaker, truth and time travel on the same road. And though it was often agonizingly slow, the truth of these tragic inhumanities in our past began to dawn on the people of reason and goodwill. Their hearts first, and then their minds began to change. You know, Mr. Speaker, I've often asked myself, what was it? What was it that changed their minds? What changed the minds of those who had previously embraced an almost invincible ignorance to hide from themselves the horror of what was happening to their innocent fellow human beings? I so wish I knew that answer, Mr. Speaker. Because you see, today, such a conundrum looms before humanity again. The most glaring recent example of which are the gut-wrenching revelations surrounding the trial and conviction in Philadelphia of Dr. Kermit Gosnell. In the words of the grand jury report, Gosnell had a simple solution for unwanted babies. He killed them. He didn't call it that. He called it, quote, ensuring fetal demise. The way he ensured fetal demise was by sticking open scissors in the back of the child's neck and cutting the spinal cord. He called it snipping. Over the years, there were hundreds of snippings. When authorities entered the clinic of Dr. Gosnell, they found a torture chamber for little babies that I do not have the words or the stomach to adequately describe. Suffice it to say that Dr. Gosnell ran a systematic practice in his late-term abortion clinic to cut the spines of those babies who had survived his attempt to abort them. Ashley Baldwin, one of Dr. Gosnell's employees, said she saw babies breathing, and she described one as 2 feet long that no longer had eyes or mouth, but in her words was like making this, quote, screeching sound, and it, quote, sounded like a little alien. And for God's sake, Mr. Speaker, we are better than that. America is better than that. And yet, if Kermit Gosnell had killed these children he now stands convicted of murdering before they had passed through the birth canal only a few moments earlier, it would have all been perfectly legal in many states, in this the land of the free and the home of the brave. Mr. Speaker, more than 325 late-term unborn babies were torturously killed without anesthesia in America just yesterday. And many of them, so many of them, cried and screamed as they died. But because it was amniotic fluid going over the vocal cords instead of air, we couldn't hear them. And all of them had at least 4 things in common. First, they were just little babies who had done nothing wrong to anyone on earth. And each one of them died a nameless, lonely, and agonizing death. And each one of their mothers was callously abandoned to deal with the emotional results that will inevitably follow. And all the gifts that these children might have brought to humanity, Mr. Speaker, are lost forever. So if there's one thing we must not miss about this unspeakably evil episode, it is that Kermit Gosnell is not an anomaly. He is the face of this murderous Fortune 500 enterprise of killing helpless unborn children in the United States of America. And with all of the distortions and the bait-and-switch tactics opponents have hurled at the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act leading up to this historic floor debate, the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act is very truly and simply a deeply sincere effort to protect both mothers and their pain-capable unborn babies entering their 6th month of gestation from heartless monsters like Kermit Gosnell. Now, given the cataclysmic implications, Mr. Speaker, for any society who turns a blind eye to atrocities cruelly forced upon the most innocent and helpless of its members, would it be too much to hope for that members of this body and Americans in general might research this issue and learn the truth of it for themselves? Because you see, Mr. Speaker, the real question in the debate before us is not whether these unborn children entering their 6th month of gestation are capable of feeling pain. The real question is, are we? If our society is to survive with our humanity intact, our human compassion toward our fellow human beings must first survive. 50 million children, 50 million dead children are enough. That is why it's so important for people to see for themselves the humanity of these little victims and the inhumanity of what is being done to them. Now, maybe it won't change everyone's mind, but it has changed so many minds. And the most of these changed minds share a common thread. They were confronted with the brutal reality of abortion on demand, and something inside them could no longer deny the truth, and they could no longer condone the murder of a defenseless child. What changed their minds? Perhaps I will really never understand what sparked that change in their hearts, Mr. Speaker. But I am convinced of one thing, that it is the same spark in the human soul that has turned the tide of blood and tragedy and hatred and inhumanity throughout human history. And whatever else it is, Mr. Speaker, it is mankind's only hope. I yield back.
Yield back. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 3rd, 2013, the gentleman from New York, Mr. Jeffries, is recognized for 60 minutes as a designee of the Minority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and include any extraneous materials into the record on the subject of this special order.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, it's my honor and my privilege once again to stand here on behalf of the Congressional Black Caucus to help anchor this special order along with my good friend, the distinguished gentleman from the Silver State, Representative Stephen Horsford, where for the next 60 minutes, members of the Congressional Black Caucus have an opportunity to speak directly to the American people about an issue of great significance as we kick off Small Business Week in America and commemorate the 50th anniversary. Entrepreneurship, innovation, the capacity of Americans who have an idea and want to translate that idea into a business initiative in urban America, in rural America, in suburban America is something that we here in the Congress should not simply celebrate as we will do this week, but figure out ways to make sure that we can facilitate those entrepreneurial ideas in the most robust manner possible and help those entrepreneurs from all over the country translate their ideas and their dreams into small business reality. Goes without saying that small businesses are the heart and soul of the American economy. Significant number of people all throughout the country are employed in small businesses on Main Street and throughout inner city commercial corridors and in the far reaches of rural America. And many of these small businesses, we of course know, were also hit extremely hard in the aftermath of the collapse of the economy in 2008. They were knocked down on the ground, and it's our job in the Congress and government, working with industry, to help lift those small businesses up off the ground, get them back on their feet so they can survive and thrive in the face of the economic difficulty that they confronted. And so we'll be presenting ideas related to entrepreneurship for small businesses throughout America generally, and in the context of entrepreneurship and innovation in the African American community. And we're going to begin today with the distinguished gentleman from Newark, New Jersey, our good friend, Representative Donald Payne, who is a distinguished member of the Small Business Committee. Prior to arriving in the Congress, he worked hard on these issues, and he's been a leader since being sworn in as a member of the House of Representatives. It's my honor and my privilege to yield to Representative Payne.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank my colleagues for anchoring tonight's CBC special order on entrepreneurship in the black community. Since 1963, the President of the United States has issued a proclamation designating a week which the country applauds the critical contributions of American entrepreneurs and small business owners. Annually, we recognize the fact that though they are called small businesses, there is nothing small about the impact they have on the nation's economy. Last year, small businesses created nearly 700,000 jobs, accounting for 40% of employment gains across companies of all sizes nationwide. So it is fair to say that small businesses are truly the backbone of our economy, and entrepreneurship is still the primary pathway to realizing the American dream. This is particularly true in the black community. The heart of the entrepreneurship is opportunity. And historically, black entrepreneurship has meant opportunities for equality, equity, and a vehicle out of poverty. Throughout the years, black entrepreneurs have harnessed economic power to strengthen the black community, create jobs, and develop a voice to advocate for well-being of blacks in America. After the Civil War, though employment prospects were slim for former enslaved men, Isaac Myers organized 1,000 black ship caulkers who had lost their jobs in Baltimore, created a union, bought a shipyard, and won a government contract to provide employment for these men. In 1903, Maggie Lena Walker pooled her community's money together to charter the St. Luke's Penny Savings Bank. This bank was for the community, by the community, and provided a safe and courteous place to conduct business away from the racism and harsh treatment often encountered in white-owned businesses. In 1906, a young entrepreneur by the name of Dr. O.W. Gurley bought 40 acres of land in Tulsa, Oklahoma. He created and supported the creation of several businesses which attracted African Americans fleeing the oppression in Mississippi. The area became known as Black Wall Street and was the home to several prominent black businesses who created jobs and provided a safe haven for African Americans who were banned from other sections of the town. We well know that Madam C.J. Walker revolutionized black hair care and was America's first black female millionaire. However, she also used her financial power to contribute to anti-lynching campaigns and other efforts to equalize for rights for blacks in America. These are a few of the countless examples of black entrepreneurs who, through their businesses and their philanthropic efforts, have empowered the black community through their business efforts. And these efforts, as well as their relevance, continue today. It is estimated that by the year 2015, black buying power will be $1.1 trillion. In this economy where the black unemployment rate is double that of whites and the income and wealth gap persistently intersects with the race gap, black entrepreneurship is more important than ever in helping the community at large. More than 60 cents of every dollar spent at local businesses is recirculated into the local economy. So local black-owned businesses are a true asset to the community. As a member of the Committee on Small Business, I've worked to strengthen the SBA's lending programs and increase access to capital for all populations, but especially minorities and women. I will also be introducing 2 key pieces of legislation to assist small businesses as well. Recognizing the nation's energy boom and green energy potential, this legislation will ensure that green small businesses have the resources to grow their business and hire more workers, especially in low-income communities. This effort will help black businesses and the other marginalized populations remain competitive in the small business arena. Small businesses and entrepreneurship fuel the engine for economic growth and opportunity. For the black community, that means lower unemployment, higher college attendance and completion, and strong outcomes for the present and the future. Consequently, there is no time to waste in getting our small businesses up and running. I will continue to be an outspoken advocate in empowering entrepreneurs to take risks, to pursue their dreams, and to continue to be an integral part of growing this nation's economy. And Mr. Speaker, before I take my seat, I'd just like to talk a minute about my entrepreneurial experiences back in the mid-'70s when my Uncle William Payne, a former assemblyman from the state of New Jersey, created a business in 1969 that manufactured computer forms, the old printed sheets that we used to use that had the holes down the side. I'm sure some of us remember that are old enough. But we were the only African-American firm in the nation, in Newark, New Jersey, that manufactured computer forms. And the challenges that my uncle faced in business were great. He would have to pay for his raw materials ahead of time and not given the normal net 30 days or 60 days in order to manufacture your product and sell it. He had to come with a certified check, and there was no other reason than the color of his skin. So I understand what it is to have your back against the wall in terms of trying to make it in this nation. But he persevered, and we were in business for 20 years. And so I'm very proud of that legacy that he left behind. He was hiring people with handicaps back in those days. Our forklift driver was actually hearing impaired, deaf. But he worked. He was a great worker, and he did not let that get in the way of him being a useful person in society and earning his way. We also, in the 70s, were ahead of the curve in terms of hiring young men coming back from prison in the 70s, far before reentry was the word of the day. So I'm very proud of that legacy and heritage there in Newark, New Jersey with Urban Data Systems, and that is why I feel so strongly about continuing to support small businesses throughout this nation. And I yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the distinguished gentleman from New Jersey for so eloquently laying out the history of entrepreneurship in America through the lens of the black community, and also detailing his own personal experiences in Newark, New Jersey. Experiences that I think were replicated in many inner cities all across the country in the face of urban decay and abandonment that took place in the 1960s and the 1970s. It was those African Americans who remained behind in inner city after inner city after inner city in America with an entrepreneurial idea, providing service that otherwise may not have been available. And so we want to make sure that we create opportunities for all Americans to be able to grow their businesses and transform their ideas into reality. And I look forward, and all the members of the CBC look forward to working closely with Representative Payne in his capacity on the Small Business Committee with the leadership that he has demonstrated. We've now been joined by another distinguished member of the freshman class who also has experience from a personal perspective as a successful small business owner and entrepreneur. And so it's my honor right now to yield the floor to the distinguished gentle lady from Ohio, Representative Joyce Beatty.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to my colleague, Congressman Jeffries. I rise this evening to discuss a very important topic to me, a topic that is important to me, to my district, and to this nation, why entrepreneurship matters to Black America. This week we celebrate National Small Business Week, which gives us a chance to collectively recognize small businesses and the impact they have and have had on our local communities and the nation. Tonight you will hear a lot about African Americans who started from humble means, African Americans who had great ideas and decided that they wanted to open a beauty shop, a barber shop, maybe a bakery, or like my husband's family, a family restaurant. We'll hear the stories of how they became millionaires and billionaires. We've heard about Madam C.J. Walker, who started with a small idea and became the first African-American female millionaire. And then we all know about the young lady in the state next to mine that grew up and wanted to be a radio announcer. And probably 50-some years ago, she had no idea that she'd be one of America's billionaires, and that's Oprah Winfrey. So today is so important to us, not only as members of the Congressional Black Caucus, but it's important to us as a nation that we recognize those who spur the economy. So often we think that it is the large industrial operations that make up the businesses in this wonderful country. But if you thought about where do half of this nation work, they work in small businesses. They own small businesses. You see, small businesses in America has been the stabilizing force in the economy. Entrepreneurs are the backbone of creativity and production. Small business is what stimulates the economic growth. With over 60% of all private sector non-farm jobs coming from small businesses. It is a proven fact that small businesses are critical to the United States economy. Minority-owned businesses are also very important to the economy. The strong growth in owner income, decrease in the amount of companies going bankrupt is a great sign. Self-employment figures are also growing in this nation. As a matter of fact, in the last year alone, small businesses created nearly 700,000 jobs, accounting for 40% of employment gains across companies of all sizes. You see, I know firsthand the value of being a small business owner, because for the past 20 years, I have been a small business owner. My husband is a small business owner, and we have been able to employ a diverse group of employees right in Columbus, Ohio, providing our employees with stable wages and the opportunity for professional development. And for minority communities, small businesses are often the primary economic drivers by employing those who are seniors, those who are unemployed, those who live right in the neighborhood or have had some financial or workforce development challenges. This is why we are here today and why it is so important in minority communities for Small Business Administration to continue to develop programs which help minority small business owners break through the many barriers that prevent them their interest into the business community. But more can be done and more should be done to help support minority businesses, because in addition to the many economic benefits they provide, small businesses also foster innovation, entrepreneurship, and creativity. As a member of the Financial Services Committee, I was pleased to learn that tucked within that broad package of financial industry reforms contained in the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and the Consumer Protection Act law is a provision that mandates that each covered governmental agency establish an Office of Minority and Women Inclusion. The Office of Minority and Women Inclusion Directors must develop and implement standards and procedures to ensure to the maximum extent possible the fair and inclusion utilization of minorities, women, and minority and women-owned businesses in all business activities of all levels in the agencies, including procurement, insurance, and all other types of contracts. So what I've decided to do is to host a roundtable discussion with small and minority women-owned businesses through the leadership of our ranking member on financial services, Congresswoman Maxine Waters. And I'm also so pleased that so many organizations like Black Enterprise recently partnered with Nationwide Insurance to hold its 2013 Entrepreneurs Conference right in my district in Columbus, Ohio this past May. This conference provided a great platform for African American entrepreneurs to share ideas, to be able to network, and to grow their business among some 1,200 participants. We also honored African American entrepreneurs who own some of the best small businesses in the country. I think it's also important for us to know, as in my home state and many other home states, small business owners can take advantage of SBA programs. In my district, too, the Ohio Mini Loan Guarantee Program, which provides guarantees or fixed assets for small businesses for projects of $100,000 or less. Also, there is a mini direct loan program, which provides direct loans for businesses who are going to locate in Ohio or who want to expand their business to demonstrate that they can create new ideas and new jobs for Ohioans. It is very clear to me that small businesses will continue to grow. They will grow our economy at a proven rate. While effective programs exist today to help minority-owned small businesses, I believe we can continue to do more. I believe that's why my colleagues are here today, allowing us the opportunity to come and tell our stories, because it educates the public. It makes a difference, and that's why I am here. And I thank you so very much for allowing me the opportunity to come and talk about small businesses, and more importantly, to talk about small businesses that are owned by women and that are owned by African Americans, because we're making a difference. Thank you, and I yield back.
Well, I thank the distinguished gentlelady from Ohio. Certainly eloquently illustrated the point that small business and entrepreneurship are as American as baseball and apple pie. And for women and minority-owned businesses to thrive is for America to thrive. As has been pointed out by speaker after speaker, so many of the jobs that Americans hold to this day are as a result of the employment that small businesses provide. And so as we figure out how we can continue to recover from the Great Recession of 2008, it's critically important for us to make sure that we can guarantee the best possible opportunity for small businesses to succeed and for entrepreneurial ideas to flourish. That is why we've taken to the floor today, and it's my honor and my privilege to now yield to another distinguished member of the freshman class, my co-anchor for this CBC special order, the gentleman from the Silver State, Representative Stephen Horsford.
Good evening. Let me first thank my good friend, the gentleman from the Empire State, the co-anchor, Mr. Jeffries. It has been a pleasure now for the first 6 months of our term in this 113th Congress to work with you to bring these issues to the floor each week on behalf of the Congressional Black Caucus. And I really have appreciated your friendship, your perspective, and your intelligence on so many issues, and I look forward to continuing to work with you. And to my other colleagues, the dynamic freshman class, it's so great to have colleagues who work together, who have a like-mindedness to represent our communities and to do it in a way that addresses the needs of all people. And the gentlelady from Ohio, Ms. Beatty, has so many experiences from the private sector to her role working as an administrator in the university, the Ohio State University. It's just been great to get to know her, as well as my good friend and colleague from New Jersey, the gentleman, Mr. Payne. These are individuals that have great perspective and experience
and whose voice on these issues are incredibly important. And I'm just pleased to be among such a dynamic group that is trying to make a difference here in this 113th Congress. And so today, we are here to bring attention and focus to celebrating the 50th anniversary of National Small Business Week. And it is fitting that tonight's special order hour will focus on how small businesses are critical to the growth of our economy. And as we do during these normal hours, people can follow us on hashtag CBC Talks. If you have a question or you have an idea, if you have a perspective that you want heard, this is your opportunity, because it's not just about us coming here, but it's about us listening to what it is our constituents want us to bring to the floor. You know, as my colleagues have already said, small businesses are the backbone of our economy. The CBC has fought and continues to fight to strengthen programs that create economic opportunity and foster entrepreneurship. Over the last year, small businesses in our country have created 700,000 jobs, accounting for 40% of employment gains across companies of all sizes. More than half of all Americans either own or work for a small business. So when we talk about increasing access to capital, enhancing business partnerships, and providing important technical assistance, the CBC is talking about the small businesses who are the engines of our economy. And we have solutions, and they're solutions that we hope our colleagues on the other side will work with us to pass, because they're the right solutions for America. Solutions like Representative Rush's expanding opportunities for Main Street. You know, so much focus is always on Wall Street, but we want to bring the issues of Main Street and small businesses to this body. Whether it's Representative Richmond's Microenterprise and Youth Entrepreneurship Development Act, making sure that we are helping new businesses and young entrepreneurs have the resources they need to start and grow their business. Or whether it's Representative Clark's Expanding Opportunities for Small Businesses Act. The CBC is working on solutions, and these are the types of real policies that are before this body, and we would urge our colleagues on both sides of the aisle to work with us to make these bills law. These bills, if enacted, would greatly enhance the small business landscape for minority entrepreneurs. You know, I had an opportunity recently to visit the American History Museum. And when you're there and you reflect on our history as a nation, and you see the important contributions that African Americans have made to the establishment and growth of our great nation, whether it be in politics or government, civil rights or social justice, and yes, entrepreneurship, it's African Americans who have helped build our country, and it's African American businesses that need to be part of our plan for economic growth. Three issues that I hear most from my constituents, small business owners, that I believe have to be at the center of our discussion as we celebrate the 50th anniversary of Small Business Week is, number one, access to capital. Whether it be on the need for lines of credit to help with the day-to-day operations of a business, or capital loans to help a business buy new equipment so that they can expand or grow. The second issue is equal opportunity to bid on and win contracts, both in the private sphere, but most importantly in our role, also the federal contracting opportunities. You know, when I look at the amount of money that is being spent by these federal agencies, and to know that there are not the types of efforts to really provide outreach or support to our minority and women owned and veteran-owned businesses is something that the Congressional Black Caucus believes has to be a priority. And third is the need to ensure compliance with minority participation in federal contracting. And this is an area, to my good friend from New York, I hope that we will be able to work on. I know the ranking member over small business, this is a priority of hers as well, and I want to see what we can do to hold accountable every agency to do their part to ensure that there's ample participation from all communities. You know, in April I held my first small business forum with my constituents that focused on creating good-paying jobs through federal contracting opportunities. We held another one recently on access to capital. And it was the Small Business Administration, which was there, that talked about the fact that they deliver millions of dollars of loans, contracts, counseling sessions, and other forms of assistance to small businesses. Well, we sought to replicate that type of support in our district with our small business owners. We had representatives from various agencies attend, and they mapped out strategies for local businesses who are looking to grow and add more workers. We had representatives from agencies including the Department of Defense, the General Service Administration, the Department of Energy, the Department of Veteran Affairs, the Environmental Protection Agency, and the Small Business Administration, as well as our Governor's Office of Economic Development. The forum provided a great opportunity to discuss our plan to create jobs in our local community. Over 60 local small business owners attended the event. Along with representatives from federal agencies, other business owners helped local residents and aspiring entrepreneurs figure out how to position themselves to compete for federal contracts and grants. Those grants create jobs in our local community. And job creation and economic growth is what we should be about as we talk about celebrating National Small Business Owners Week. What was most rewarding to my friend from New York was a panel of young entrepreneurs. We had young people who are still in high school who have a business plan for how they can create everything from backpacks to marketing to social marketing opportunities. And these are young people with ideas, with passion, with vision, but we want to make sure that they have the right support as well. So listening to those young people made me appreciate just how important these resources are and why we need to continue to work to make them a reality. Let me finish my remarks at this point by talking about the need for business-to-business partnerships and making sure that we have these face-to-face meetings with those who know the ins and outs of securing grants, those who know how to go about contracting, and also the need for access to capital and how to secure the loans that small businesses need to grow their business. We want to encourage those who are listening or following us on the hashtag CBC Talks to attend one of the Small Business Administration's matchmaking events during Small Business Week. There are several. There's one in Seattle, there's one in Dallas, St. Louis, Pittsburgh, and even here in the nation's capital in Washington, D.C. And to reach out to resources like Black Enterprise. They have a very successful Young Entrepreneurs Conference that they hold annually that helps young people learn about the opportunities of starting their small business and what it means to develop a plan, to do marketing, to have all of their plans in place so that their business, once launched, is successful. And finally, I want to encourage people to reach out and join the U.S. Black Chamber of Commerce and their local urban and Black Chambers of Commerce, because these are opportunities where they can connect to resources, get the support that they need, and help to grow their businesses. So I yield back to the gentleman from New York at this time and thank him and the other members for this spotlight on Small Business Week.
But has made several important points, and if I could just highlight a few in particular. We hear a lot of talk here in Washington, D.C. about the evils of regulation. That talk is generally put forth in very generalized terms without being able to point to specific regulations that actually are impeding the growth and opportunities of small businesses, but it's certainly something that we hear a lot about, the evils of regulation. But the reality is, if you really want to deal with some of the problems that are confronting small businesses in America, I think Representative Horsford has laid it out in pretty compelling ways. One, we need to ensure that our small businesses have access to capital in order to be able to grow their businesses, allow them to flourish and expand, build upon the ideas that exist. Two, we've got to make sure that we give these small businesses access to contracting and procurement opportunities. Many times there are small businesses that have the capacity to do the job but are unaware of the opportunities that actually exist, whether that's at the federal government level, the state government level, or down at the municipal or county governmental level. And lastly, as my good friend Representative Horsford pointed out, we've got to make sure that we provide access to technical assistance to deal with the compliance issues that businesses do confront. That doesn't mean that all of these issues are overly burdensome or unnecessary, but we want to make sure that small businesses do have the capacity to operate within the regulatory framework that is applicable and reasonable, and that the elected officials in whatever the particular jurisdiction have deemed necessary for the proper functioning of a small business. So I thank the distinguished gentleman from Nevada for raising those very compelling points. We've now been joined by a very important leader on the issue of small business and entrepreneurship who comes from the great state of New York, the great borough and county of Kings in Brooklyn, where we have many entrepreneurs, and she's helped many businesses over time. She is on the Small Business Committee. She's my neighbor, so I wanted to make sure I gave her the appropriately generous introduction. It's an honor to yield the floor to the distinguished gentlelady from New York, Congresswoman Yvette Clarke.
Let me thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank my colleague, Mr. Horsford of Nevada, and my colleague and neighbor from Brooklyn, New York, the Honorable Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, for yielding their time and for their tremendous leadership, week in and week out, in providing a view into the Congressional Black Caucus perspective on the issues of the day. Mr. Speaker, it has been nearly 5 years since our nation experienced the worst financial calamity since the Great Depression. However, as our economy continues to recover, unemployment remains stubbornly high, sitting at 7.5% nationally, with unemployment at 13.2% and 9% respectively for African Americans and Latino Americans. As a member of the House Small Business Committee, I know the challenges facing our nation's minority-owned small businesses and entrepreneurs. From access to capital, a problem for minority-owned and disadvantaged small businesses in the best of economic times, or a lack of access to knowledge and information of the available options to assist them. I understand that we must work increasingly and unceasingly to ensure that even as the media focuses on the booming stock market, that our nation's real job creators are not forgotten, not marginalized, and overlooked. Their success is vital not only for a more robust recovery, but it is to fully addressing our nation's national employment crisis. Ironically enough, Mr. Speaker, this week is the 50th commemoration of National Small Business Week. It appears, though, that the Republican-led House is totally tone deaf to the millions of Americans still unable to find gainful employment. That not one of the bills before the House this week support job creation, real job creation, nor do they rescind the harmful effects of the sequester, which by almost every measure has been clearly detrimental to our nation's economy and is tantamount to negligence. In my capacity as a member of the Small Business Committee, I've worked with my colleagues to promote all small businesses, especially minority, women, and veteran-owned small businesses in my district and across the nation as they try to navigate these self-imposed and manufactured uncertain economic times. I am a strong supporter of the SCORE program, which provides technical assistance necessary for small businesses in underserved communities to just get off the ground. I also work with the SBA and the SBA Office of Advocacy to ensure that all of the firms who qualify for SBA contracting and capital access programs are provided an equal opportunity for participation. Mr. Speaker, I have the honor and privilege of representing Brooklyn's 9th Congressional District. My constituency includes an extremely large small business community with commerce corridors lined from block to block with small mom-and-pop businesses and storefronts. These unique community provides the foundation of not only the economic, but the unique social fabric of Brooklyn. We must build on this foundation in Brooklyn, New York, and across our great nation. Every day that the House majority focuses the people's time on issues that divide us is another day that our small businesses are treated as a subordinate concern. It is another day that our nation's job seekers spend job searching in vain, looking for the proverbial needle in the haystack. And another day that our nation will have to wait for the engine that powers our economy to be firing on all cylinders. Mr. Speaker, as our nation celebrates National Small Business Week, I look forward to a genuine debate that addresses the totality of our nation's small business communities and not cherry-picking the low-hanging fruit. I'd like to thank the Congressional Black Caucus, who, like myself, treat every week as Small Business Week, for focusing on this crucially important issue and for having me this evening. And in closing, I just want to share with you that as we go through the immigration debate, that we acknowledge that oftentimes in the black community, much of our entrepreneurial spirit is found in those entrepreneurs who have come to the United States and find a niche market where they can provide goods, services, and products to people from their homes of origin, and by extension to the rest of the nation. I had the distinct honor and privilege of meeting a gentleman who immigrated to the United States from the island nation of Jamaica. One of the great delicacies, and they've actually become nationally renowned, is called the beef patty. This gentleman's name is none other than Lowell Hawthorne, and he started with a small storefront in the Bronx, New York, and has now grown that storefront into a franchise opportunity that has made him, his family, and all those who have engaged, very wealthy individuals, created job opportunities for hundreds of people, and has provided one of the most delicious delicacies that one can ever taste. Lowell Hawthorne, truly an entrepreneur who has availed himself of small business support from the SBA and has been able to grow his business. This is a success story that can be modeled and patterned after, and we need to make sure that those who have those ideas that are innovative, that are creative, entrepreneurs get the support that they need to continue to build this great country of ours. So I'd like to thank my colleagues for anchoring the CBC special order, and I also like to ask for unanimous consent to enter the statement of Congresswoman, the gentle lady from Texas, Ms. Eddie Bernice Johnson, into the record. She has sent a statement on the 50th anniversary or 50th annual National Small Business Week. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back
the gentlelady's statement will be included in the record pursuant to general leave.
Thank the distinguished gentlelady from New York for a very thoughtful and insightful remarks, and I certainly thank her for pointing out that immigrants from the great state of New York, and in fact immigrants who've come from across the world to states all across the United States, are hardworking, family-oriented, entrepreneurial, innovative individuals who have helped to revive and rejuvenate communities all across this great land. And it's something that we in this chamber need to recognize as we celebrate and commemorate Small Business Week and prepare to move forward, hopefully, with some form of comprehensive immigration reform, that we recognize the contributions that immigrants have made in the small business context. We've been joined by another champion of small businesses here in the Congress who's got a very distinguished record on a wide variety of issues. She's been a thoughtful, eloquent, and passionate voice as it relates to entrepreneurship in America and specifically within the black community. It's my honor and my privilege now to yield the floor to the distinguished gentle lady from the great Lone Star State of Texas, Representative Sheila Jackson Lee.
Let me thank my colleagues who've gathered here today and tonight. Thank you, Congressman Jeffries, again for combined leadership of yourself, Mr. Horsford from Nevada, and of course my dear, dear friend, Congressman Don Payne, Congresswoman Yvette Clarke, and I know that the gentlelady from Ohio was also contributing this evening, and I certainly thank her for her leadership. I am very pleased to be able to stand here and honor a group that I frankly believe are the anchor of the economy for the United States of America, and that is small businesses. If we look at the landscape of American history, we did not start with multinationals, international corporations. We really started with mom-and-pop businesses, whether it is in fact when we were told in the historical concept to go west, young man and woman, and those from the 13 colonies originally, as they moved from the East Coast to explore the West as far as California. In those pioneering towns, you had to have small businesses. And then, of course, if we speak about the history of our community, first coming to this nation as slaves, but then developing artisan skills in the spirit of Booker T. Washington, being carpenters and painters and bricklayers. And if you will look at the history of the South, many of the African Americans, this was their business, along with funeral homes, along with restaurants. I remember the aunt of my husband. It was one of our special treats to be able to go down to Aunt Frances' location in Alabama. Her store was near Alabama State, and it was the place to go. It was also a little hotel. And there was no doubt that Aunt Frances could cook, but she turned it into a business. And the students knew that that was a place that that was a comfort to them, that good meals could be gotten for reasonable prices. Those were small businesses in the African American community. And frankly, I believe that we have not done well by them. We have not done well by minority businesses overall, by women-owned businesses. Yes, there are some moments of success that I will recount in just a moment, but in terms of the federal government really putting elbow grease to the idea of outreach to minority businesses, they can do better. Yes, we have the Small Business Administration, and there are many instances of outreach, but let me share with you how we could do better. First of all, we can eliminate the sequestration. We can put on the floor H.R. 900, which is legislation that many of us have signed, led by John Conyers, and I'm an original co-sponsor among many others. Eliminate the sequestration. It is killing us. And frankly, it is killing small businesses. It is killing the opportunities for small businesses in terms of small businesses who do small amount of business with the federal government. All of that is being cut. We can also fix the Internal Revenue Service. Because I will tell you, Mr. Jeffries, if you poll any of your small businesses, any of those S corporations, or any of those mom and pops, or any of those individuals who have businesses in their name, I can assure you that there is a difficult situation with IRS audits. They seem to find small businesses and they seem to find minority businesses. And so I think we as a Congress, we want fairness. We certainly want the IRS that has a lot of hardworking workers. We've just found out that they targeted liberal groups as well as others. But we want them to find a sort of the right space to be able to allow our small businesses to not suffocate but to grow, and to work with them in what we call offer and compromise. So I think we need to fix the IRS. And certainly we need to fix the whole issue of credit scoring, allowing the small businesses to access, if you will, the right kind of credit. If they can get credit, then they can grow. And I would imagine that if this whole place was filled up with small businesses, and I asked them, the colleagues that are in this room, it was all filled up with small businesses, asked them to raise their hand about access to credit, or this whole issue of credit scoring. And we in the federal government can do better. We can do better with a fixed tax system that respects the growth of small businesses to allow them to grow their business and give them the kind of tax incentives that will be helpful. Let me also say, as I bring my remarks to a close, and I want to say to Congressman Clark, who's already on the floor, she knows now that I'm going to have to cite some of my businesses that have come and made great opportunities for workers. But let me just say that we need to be able to, how should I say it, encourage all these government agencies. Do you know how much the General Services Administration buys and how much they build? All of these agencies, every single bill that comes through here, we should work with our Republican colleagues who believe in small businesses to be able to add amendments that deals with the outreach to minority, women, and small businesses. That's what we're missing. They're intimidated by doing businesses with the federal government, doing business with the federal government. And the General Service Administration is one of the worst offenders. They spend money on building buildings, they spend money on buying buildings, and their MWBE record is horrific. And what they say is they don't have a provision that incentivizes them, or there's no provision in their structure that causes them to move forward on MWBEs. We've got to do something about that. Maybe we can collectively do it as a Congressional Black Caucus to be able to address the question of an agency that buys everything, builds everything for the federal government, and they don't have an incentive. Just last week, I put in an amendment on the defense authorization. I want to thank the Democrats and Republicans for being supportive. I want to look forward to working with them again in the agricultural bill. But finally, what I would say is that I am grateful that we are highlighting small businesses today. And I hope that I've listed a few items that we will hear from small businesses, that we can hear your voices and tell us how we can help you better, either with the IRS, with sequestration, with the outreach in the Small Business Administration, or working with the General Services Administration so that you have more opportunity to participate as a small business. Now let me cite a few of my businesses as I go to my seat in Texas. I want to celebrate Frenchie's, the Crusoe family, that has been in the chicken frying business for 50 years plus. Yes, I have a great excitement that they have taken that business and they are in the marketing business of making food products that they're selling to grocery stores. They've grown from being that place where the students from Texas Southern University would go and the rest of us would go. by expanding. They have kept people hired for 50 years. Their father has gone on to glory, their mother is still alive, but the children have kept it alive, and I want to salute them because it is a business of the family, and they came from Louisiana, made their way over in this direction. I want to salute Case Lawal and the KMAC. It's one of the only standing energy companies owned by an African American in the United States, along with Osika, owned by Michael Harness, and a pipeline company, Milton Carroll, who's had Precision Instruments for a number of years, that was in the oil drilling business. I want to salute them. I want to salute Cool Runnings, my first visit to them, Jamaican restaurant, has taken their business and grown it to have, in Houston, Texas, by the way, has grown it to be able to have a restaurant and a takeout business is great. I want to salute the Houston Black Expo. Because they are having their big event on June 21st, and businesses all over Houston will be benefiting from Mr. Love's great effort in the Houston Black Expo. Finally, I want to conclude by saying that small businesses are, in fact, the backbone of America. I know that there will be a great opportunity for us to expand on that, so let me close by thanking you, Mr. Jeffries, Mr. Horsford, thanking you so very much for highlighting what is truly the infrastructure of jobs in America, small businesses and minority-owned businesses, women-owned businesses. I yield back to the gentleman. Thank you for your courtesy.
Thank the distinguished gentlelady from Texas for a very eloquent and thoughtful remarks and for putting forth some very important policy prescriptions for what we in the Congress can do to help advance the agenda on behalf of small businesses all across this country and certainly in the women and minority-owned business context. I also want to note, I'm thankful that Representative Clark mentioned one of the important immigrant businesses that began in the Bronx, New York, but has spread all across the country, the Golden Crust Caribbean Bakery and Grill, as well as I thank the distinguished gentlewoman from Texas for highlighting some of the important businesses that have sprouted out in Houston, Texas. Those are just a few examples of what entrepreneurs in the black immigrant community and the African American community have done all across the land. And all we're saying is we want to make sure that we provide these businessmen and women the same opportunities that others throughout time in America have had, because if we do, they will be able to translate their entrepreneurial spirit, their innovative ideas, their vision into reality that will make economic sense for their communities and lead to the hiring of American citizens and others who need the employment opportunities that these small businesses will continue to generate. Just a few observations in closing. One of the things that was mentioned earlier today on the floor was the fact that many small businesses confront an uncertain economic environment. And as a result of this uncertainty, they are unable to move forward in any concrete fashion because they don't know when the next crisis will hit our economy. Are we going to default on our debt? Are we going to fall over the fiscal cliff? How long are we going to be dealing with sequestration? And I would suggest to my good friends on the other side of the aisle that if we really want to help out small businesses and entrepreneurs, we've got to figure out a way to come together and find common ground as it relates to moving our economy forward. Because as long as we're in this period of uncertainty, it will be difficult for small businesses and for entrepreneurs to take any step forward as it relates to growing their businesses and allowing them to be more prosperous. Now, there's a vehicle for us to try and find common ground. For 4 years, my good friends on the other side of the aisle were complaining about the fact that we were not in regular order, that the Senate failed to pass a budget. Well, this year, a budget resolution was passed in the House of Representatives. A budget resolution was passed in the Senate. Two very different visions for where we should go as a country. but the vehicle to find common ground is to move forward with a conference committee. The majority in the Senate has indicated they are prepared to move forward and appoint conferees, but the Speaker of the People's House refuses to do so, even though for the last 4 years folks were complaining about the absence of regular order. If you want to do something about small businesses, what we should do in America is figure out how we in the Congress can come together, find common ground, create some economic certainty so these entrepreneurs can move forward. I don't know if my good friend has any parting comments, but let me just say that we in the CBC are committed to continuing to stand up for entrepreneurship in America, for opportunity, for the fruitful pursuit of the American dream through innovation. And we extend an olive branch to members of the other side of the aisle on this issue and on all other issues, so we can finally find a way to come together and move this economy forward in a way that should benefit all Americans. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. With respect to a unanimous consent request entered earlier today, the Chair would clarify that under Clause 7 of Rule 12, a request to remove the name of a co-sponsor cannot be entertained after the final committee authorized to consider the measure reports it to the House or is discharged from its consideration. H.R. 1797 is currently on the Union calendar, and any request to remove a co-sponsor at this point may not be entertained. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 3, 2013, the Chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Holmgren, for 30 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Before I begin, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous materials on the topic of my special order.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, as I begin, I do want to wish and hope that you and others of our colleagues had a very happy Father's Day yesterday. It is one of the most important things for fathers and mothers to be able to provide for their families. Mr. Speaker, this evening I'd like to talk about what for many Americans is probably the most pressing or maybe depressing issue our country is facing right now: jobs, unemployment, and the need to create more jobs. But while we as a nation face challenges, the roadmap to prosperity is clear. The question is, will we act on the recommendations of those who create the jobs that drive our national economy, America's small businesses and entrepreneurs? As I speak, the unemployment rate in the United States stands at 7.6%. According to the American Enterprise Institute, just 64.4% of working-age men are employed, the lowest level by far since the Great Depression, and an astounding 5 percentage points lower than at the beginning of the current downturn. A staggering 4.4 million workers have been out of work for 27 weeks or longer. In Illinois, my home state, the unemployment rate is even higher at 9.3%. The unemployment rate in my home state has been at or above 8.6 since April of 2009. 611,000 people are currently out of work in Illinois. According to the Bureau of Labor and Statistics, of the 26.3 million part-time workers, 7.8 million are working part-time for economic reasons, meaning the job market wasn't robust enough to support full-time positions, or they could only find part-time work. Jobs, unemployment, job growth, all of these are issues on the minds of Americans because directly or indirectly, all Americans are affected by them. When I meet with small businesses and employers around my district, I ask them, what would it take for you to create just one more job? I would love for them to create 10 more jobs or 20 more jobs or 50 more jobs. But I ask them, what would it take for you to create just one more job? And they tell me that the best way to spur job creation and economic growth is to reduce government regulations, cut taxes and simplify the tax code, and reduce the size of government by cutting spending. Having a full-time, stable job and going to work every day is necessary just to meet the challenges of daily living. American pocketbooks are pummeled every day. Take gas prices, for instance. The nationwide average price for a gallon of gas has jumped by more than $1 in the last 4 years, from $2.58 a gallon in June of 2009 to $3.64 a gallon in June of this year. The price of gas in Illinois right now is averaging $4.08 a gallon. That's 15 cents per gallon higher than this time last year. And in Chicago area and in my district, prices are even higher. The average price for a gallon of regular gas is a ridiculous $4.28. This is just one example of how everyday life is becoming less and less affordable for ordinary Americans. Creating good, full-time jobs must be our priority. But small business owners in my district tell me that in the current business-averse climate, this is difficult, if not impossible, for them to do. Jeff, the president of a small industrial pump manufacturing company, is not hiring. He would like to, but he says he can't. He says that business owners have to be optimistic that the business environment will be suitable for business growth. He goes on to say, however, the unfriendly business climate coming from Washington and the huge deficit spending reduces optimism that the business climate will continue to improve or even remain stable. Jeff also says government regulation and high taxation create uncertainty, and government regulation and inflationary policies are driving up the cost of hiring. The primary resource a business needs is employees. Then there's Tom, the president of a raw materials distribution company in my district, who says the biggest thing holding me back from hiring is uncertainty of the future business climate. Tom said, we have already seen health care costs increase of nearly 20% year over year in early 2013, which was on top of the 12% increase in 2012. Tom also stated, and I quote, we pay for 75% of the cost of health care for our employees. The parts of health care legislation yet to be implemented will probably penalize us even more for doing the right thing. We do not understand how health care legislation will impact our business, end quote. The recommendations of the small businesses that create the jobs in this country, the engines of the economy, are critical to increasing employment and spurring growth in our national economy. Reducing the regulatory burden on small businesses is one critical factor towards inducing them to hire more workers. The burdensome nature of proposed federal regulation is making long-term planning for businesses and growth virtually impossible. An inability to plan is having paralyzing effect on local investment and hiring. According to the National Federation of Independent Business, in only the last 3 months, there have been 6,669 regulatory changes posted or notices posted on the federal regulatory website. That's an average of 74 regulations per day. Let me repeat that. NFIB's own study says in only the last 3 months, there have been 6,669 regulatory changes posted or notices posted on the federal regulatory website, an average of 74 regulations every single day. This regulatory morass forces small businesses to hold on to any extra revenue they may have for fear of new compliance costs. This means foregoing opportunities to invest or hire new workers. Some businesses are forced to close altogether. A recent poll of the National Association of Manufacturers and the National Federation of Independent Business found that 62% of small business owners and manufacturers say the United States' own regulation, rules, and taxes impact their businesses more negatively than foreign competition. So our own regulation, according to a majority of business owners, is more harmful to them or more threatening to them than foreign competition. Small businesses are the engine of our nation's economy. They create about 2/3 of new jobs in the United States. They employ more than half of the private sector workforce. We need to unleash their potential. So what can be done? Well, we must require regulatory authorities to review their regulations for usefulness and relevance and amend them as necessary to get rid of them if they are obsolete. I have introduced legislation to do just that. H.R. 309, the Regulatory Sunset and Review Act, requires federal agencies to regularly review regulation on their books and establish a process to sunset those that are duplicative, conflicting, or no longer necessary. Small businesses need a seat at the table at the earliest stages of crafting regulation. Too often, regulators generating rules have little or no contact with the businesses affected by those regulations they implement, and thus little knowledge to the impact on jobs. Regulators need to assess the long-term costs and benefits of regulation, including how they will affect job loss and job creation, using the best available tools, and adopt only those regulations whose benefits clearly outweigh the costs. The regulatory process requires transparency and accountability, sharing publicly the reasons why certain public input was not incorporated, and disclosing the data, methods, and models underlying federal regulatory decision-making are also important steps to restoring trust to the federal regulatory process. Reducing red tape is critical, but cutting taxes and implementing meaningful tax reform that incentivizes businesses to hire is also key to invigorating job growth. When taxes are lower, businesses invest their resources and hire more workers, which is exactly what we want. When taxes are lower, tax-paying citizens are able to keep more of their own money to spend as they see fit, to save or to invest. Congress must consider the impact tax policy is having on small businesses' ability to succeed when small businesses are a primary source of job creation in the United States and the engines of economic growth. Small businesses, those with less than 500 employees, represent 99.7% of all employers and employ almost half of the private sector labor force, 55 million workers. In Illinois, again my home state, small businesses represent 98.3% of all employers and provide jobs to 2.4 million workers, about half of the private labor force. So when it comes to economic and tax policy, we need to listen to Main Street small businesses and mom and pop shops that create the jobs in this country. And this is what they're saying when it comes to taxes and spending. 91% of small businesses find that the tax code is complicated enough to hire their own tax preparer. 85% think Congress should revise the tax code. 81% think government should cut spending before ever considering tax increases. 78% want to close tax loopholes, and 71% agree that tax reform should include lowering the tax burden on small businesses. Thus, to enable small businesses to create jobs and improve the employment climate in this country, tax rates must be low. High tax rates are a problem for small businesses because they siphon off revenue owners need to reinvest for growth and to create jobs. So what needs to be done? Implementation of the comprehensive tax reform that makes the tax code fairer, less burdensome, and more comprehensive for the folks who pay taxes and the small businesses that invest in hiring. Permanent repeal of the estate or death tax, which I have long advocated, is critical for small businesses and for maintaining a healthy jobs climate. Many small businesses are family-owned. The death tax is a major impediment for such businesses to keep operating in a down economy once the owner retires or dies. Protecting small businesses from death tax is important to keep Main Street businesses operating for future generations and preserving their ability to create jobs as we try to grow this economy. We should cut taxes to spur investment and hiring. Lower tax rates lower the cost of capital and increase the risk reward for that businesses take in hiring new workers. I support increasing the small business expensing limit so businesses can immediately recover their costs that they invest in their businesses and hiring new workers. We must simplify the tax code. It's too complicated when 9 out of 10 small businesses must hire someone to prepare their own taxes. Making the tax code easier to understand and follow and not placing new reporting burdens on small businesses will help them focus on growing their businesses and creating jobs. So in addition to reducing regulatory burdens and cutting taxes, eliminating wasteful spending and reducing the size of government is key to job growth. Current trends have government spending continuing to hover at 22% of gross domestic product for the next 10 years. 22% of GDP. Continuing spending adds to the $16.6 trillion debt that in turn drives up interest costs to pay for borrowing. CBO estimates that interest paid on the national debt as a percentage of the overall budget will more than double from the current 6.2% of the budget to 14.1%, consuming an ever larger share of federal resources. Clearly, we do need to cut spending relative to the overall federal budget. Cutting spending reduces the amount of money government takes from the private economy. Cutting spending and reducing the size of government relative to the private sector keeps more money in the private sector where it can be put to productive use, such as hiring and creating jobs. And cutting wasteful spending and balancing our national budget will absolutely help job growth. It's simple. The federal government should not spend money that it takes in if we want to, spending more than we take in, if we want to create an environment conducive to job creation. I have advocated for and supported the budget my House colleagues passed this spring that balances the budget in 10 years by cutting spending and fixing our broken tax code so that it is fairer and simpler for everyone. I also support and have worked hard to pass a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution, requiring the federal government to live within its means and balance spending with the money it takes in, just as families in Illinois and across America have to do, will instill fiscal discipline required to get our economy moving in the right direction. This will also promote confidence and create certainty within our nation's private sector businesses so they can take productive steps towards hiring workers and growing their businesses. According to the small businesses I meet in my district, there are more things we can do to spur job creation in this country. We can open up American markets overseas. New markets mean greater demand for American-made goods. The businesses that manufacture these products will hire workers to meet the demand. In that regard, I have voted in favor of free trade agreements with countries such as Colombia and Panama and South Korea. I have also supported permanent normal trade relations with Russia in order that American manufacturers can receive the benefits of open markets as a result of Russia joining the WTO. We also must eliminate the bureaucracy that hinders the development of American products. Bureaucracy should not stand in the way of American innovation and bringing products to market. I'm a co-sponsor of the Protect Small Business Jobs Act. This legislation would provide small businesses with a limited grace period to correct regulatory violations, and if the violation is corrected in a timely manner, allows for the waiver of any sanctions against the small businesses. This will help business owners like Tom, who referred to one federal regulatory authority with which he was dealing, and Tom said, and I quote, "Rather than working with the industry to fix alleged issues, it is imposing significant fines right off the bat without giving companies the opportunity to first fix the concerns," end quote. Government should be a facilitator, not an obstacle, to new product development and job creation. Mr. Speaker, the pathway to a growing economy and putting people back to work is clear. The small business job creators in my district and around the country have spoken clearly. They want to get rid of burdensome and unnecessary red tape. They want lower taxes and simpler tax codes that lend to certainty and encourages growth and investment. And they want the federal government to exercise fiscal discipline and to serve as a facilitator for American innovation, product development, and marketing. Mr. Speaker, we can help American small businesses get Americans back to work. America is the land of opportunity, where with a mixture of aspiration and diligence, anyone can achieve their dreams. Let's redouble our efforts and renew our commitment to our fellow citizens to help them build a bright future for themselves, their children, and for this nation. Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
The chair would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House adjourn.
The question is on the motion to adjourn. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. Accordingly, the House stands adjourned until 10 a.m. tomorrow for morning hour debate.
So the House is gavelled out, but members return tomorrow at 10 a.m. Eastern for morning hour speeches and noon for legislative work. The chamber plans to debate a bill sponsored by Arizona Congressman Trent Franks that would ban abortions after 20 weeks. Later this week, work begins on the Farm Bill, a 5-year reauthorization of farm policies and nutrition programs. Follow the House live here on C-SPAN when members return on Tuesday.